When a sharp-tongued woman rejected the most dangerous duke in London, he chased her through a storm that should have killed them both. Stay until the end to see how she turned society's cruelest weapon against itself. And don't forget to hit like and drop a comment with what city you're watching from. The chandelier above the Harrington Ballroom held 3,000 candles. Clara Whitmore had counted them twice while pretending to listen to Lady Pemberton drone on about her nephew's prospects in the East India Company. 3,000 flames, and not one of them could burn away the suffocating tedium of another London season. "Miss Whitmore, you seem distracted." Clara turned to find Lady Pemberton's powdered face creased with concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Forgive me, I was merely admiring the craftsmanship." "The chandelier?" Lady Pemberton's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "How peculiar. Most young ladies admire the gentleman." "I find chandeliers more honest about what they are." The older woman's smile froze. Before she could formulate a response, the crowd shifted with sudden purpose, bodies turning like compass needles toward a single magnetic point. Clara didn't need to look to know what, or rather who, had arrived. Duke Adrian Blackthorne entered the ballroom the way storms entered harbors, with absolute certainty that everything in his path would move aside. And it did. The sea of silk and satin parted, conversations died mid-syllable, and every unmarried woman in the room forgot to breathe. Clara forced herself to keep counting candles. 3,001. If you included the cigarette some fool was smoking near the terrace doors. "The Duke himself," Lady Pemberton whispered, her disapproval struggling against her fascination. "They say he's ruined 4 women this season alone." "They say many things," Clara replied, "most of them invented by people desperate to feel included in someone else's story." "You don't believe the rumors?" "I believe a man with that much power doesn't need to ruin women. They ruin themselves trying to get close to him." Lady Pemberton's fan snapped open. "What a cynical view for one so young. What a realistic view for one who's watched 3 seasons from the margins." It wasn't entirely true. Clara hadn't watched from the margins. She'd deliberately placed herself there, constructing a reputation for sharp wit and sharper tongue that kept the fortune hunters at bay and the genuine suitors convinced she was too much trouble. Her father's modest estate in Derbyshire would pass to her cousin upon his death, leaving Clara with a small annuity and fewer prospects than a merchant's daughter, better to be known as difficult than desperate. The music swelled into a waltz. Couples began forming across the floor with the mechanical precision of clockwork. Clara edged toward the refreshment table, her escape route planned 3 steps ahead, as always. "Running away already?" The voice came from directly behind her left shoulder, low and amused and entirely too close. Clara's spine stiffened before she could stop it, the body's betrayal before the mind could mount its defense. She turned slowly, deliberately, and found herself looking at a cravat that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Her gaze traveled upward past a jaw that could have been carved by someone who'd never heard of mercy, past lips that suggested their owner found most of the world quietly amusing, and finally reached eyes the color of slate before a storm. Duke Adrian Blackthorne smiled down at her like a man examining something unexpected and potentially interesting. "I don't run," Clara said. "I make strategic withdrawals." "Is that what you call it?" His smile widened fractionally. "I call it the 3rd time you've avoided the dancing since I entered." "You've been watching me?" "Everyone's been watching me. You've been watching the chandelier. That alone makes you the most interesting person in this room." Clara felt her pulse quicken and hated herself for it. "Flattery from a duke, how novel." "That wasn't flattery. Flattery would be telling you that your dress is lovely." "It isn't? It's hideous. That particular shade of yellow makes you look jaundiced, and the neckline is cut for someone trying to advertise desperation." He tilted his head slightly. "But you knew that when you chose it. The question is why?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, part anger, part something she refused to name. "Perhaps I simply have poor taste." "You counted the candles in the chandelier twice within 5 minutes. People with poor taste don't notice details." He offered his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Clara stared at his outstretched palm like it might bite. "I don't dance with men I don't know." Adrian Blackthorne, 6th Duke of Thornfield, estate in Northumberland, townhouse in Mayfair, voting seat in the House of Lords, and a reputation for breaking hearts. His hand remained steady. Now you know me. Knowing facts about someone isn't the same as knowing them. Then let's remedy that. One dance. So I can become the fifth ruin of your season? His smile disappeared. For a moment, something else flickered in those storm-gray eyes, something sharp and assessing and not amused at all. You believe the gossip. I believe patterns, Clara said. 4 women in 4 months, each one left in tears or scandal or both. That's not gossip. That's mathematics. Mathematics? He lowered his hand. Tell me, miss, I don't actually know your name. Clara Whitmore. Miss Whitmore. If I told you those 4 women each pursued me with the dedication of generals planning a siege, would that change your mathematics? It would make you either a liar or someone who takes no responsibility for the consequences of his appeal. A laugh burst from him, genuine and surprised. Several heads turned. Clara realized with creeping horror that they'd attracted attention, that people were watching, that her carefully maintained invisibility had just shattered like spun sugar. I like you, Adrian said, and it sounded like a threat. I don't require your approval. Even better. He stepped closer, close enough that Clara could smell rain and tobacco and something else. Bergamot, maybe, or cedar. I'm going to be honest with you, Miss Whitmore, because I suspect anything less would insult us both. I didn't come here tonight looking for another simpering debutante or bored wife. I came because Lord Harrington owes me a favor, and calling it due required my presence. I was prepared for tedium. Instead, I found someone wearing an ugly dress on purpose, and counting candles to avoid acknowledging my existence. How tragic for you. Refreshing, actually. His voice dropped lower. Most people either want something from me or want me. You appear to want me gone. Your powers of observation are astounding. So give me what I want, and I'll give you what you want. Clara's fingers tightened on her fan. And what do I want? To escape this ballroom without dancing with anyone else tonight. He gestured toward the terrace doors. Walk with me. 10 minutes. Let everyone see you refuse me publicly, and you'll have peace for the rest of the season. Men will think you're too clever to catch. Women will think you're too proud to bother with. Why would you offer me that? Because I want 10 minutes of genuine conversation, and I'm willing to trade my pride for it. It was a trap. It had to be. Men like Adrian Blackthorne didn't trade their pride for anything, especially not conversation with an unremarkable woman in a hideous dress. But Clara's mind was already calculating angles, measuring risks, and finding, against all logic, that his offer made a kind of ruthless sense. If she refused him here, publicly, and then spent 10 minutes where everyone could see them but not hear them, the gossip would paint her as either impossibly virtuous or impossibly foolish. Either way, she'd be left alone. 10 minutes, she said, and you stay on your side of the terrace. Scout's honor. You were never a scout. How do you know? Scouts learn humility. You learned entitlement. His laugh followed them across the ballroom and out into the November night. The terrace overlooked Lady Harrington's famous rose garden, now skeletal and frostbitten in the grip of late autumn. Clara moved to the stone balustrade and gripped it hard enough to hurt, trying to ignore the fact that Adrian Blackthorne had followed her into the darkness like he had every right to be there. Behind them, music and laughter spilled through the open doors. Ahead, the garden stretched away into shadows punctuated by occasional lanterns. Clara counted her breaths. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the way her mother had taught her before everything fell apart. You're afraid of me. Clara's jaw tightened. I'm cautious around dangerous things. That's not fear. That's intelligence. Dangerous. Adrian moved to stand beside her, carefully maintaining the distance she'd demanded. Is that what you think I am? I think you're a man used to getting what you want, when you want it, with people falling over themselves to give it to you. Men like that don't develop restraint because they never need to. Men like that. He was quiet for a moment. You've categorized me already. Titled, wealthy, spoiled. Another aristocrat with too much power and too few consequences. Prove me wrong. Why should I? The question caught her off guard. Clara turned to look at him properly for the first time since they'd stepped outside. Moonlight cut harsh angles across his face, making him look older than whatever his actual years might be. Mid-30s, she guessed. Old enough to have experience, young enough to still want more. Most men would leap at the chance to defend themselves, she said carefully. I'm not most men. And you're not most women. You've made that abundantly clear. He pulled a silver case from his jacket, extracted a cigarette, then seemed to think better of it. Tell me about the chandelier. What? You counted 3,000 candles. That's not casual observation. That's... He paused, weighing words. That's someone trying very hard not to think about something else. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Maybe I just like numbers. Maybe. Or maybe you've learned to focus on things you can count because everything else in your life feels uncertain. His eyes found hers. I do it too. Not chandeliers, tiles usually, floor patterns. Last week I counted every tile in the House of Lords while Lord Pemberton gave a speech about naval appropriations. That's... Clara stopped. Absurd? Yes. Also true. He finally lit the cigarette, exhaling smoke toward the garden. I don't like naval appropriations, and I especially don't like Lord Pemberton. Counting tiles kept me from saying something that would have made the newspapers. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me to prove you wrong. I can't prove I'm not dangerous. I probably am, but I can prove I'm more than the caricature you've built in your mind. Clara wanted to argue. She wanted to reconstruct her walls, reinforce her defenses, retreat back into the safety of cynicism and distance. Instead, she heard herself say, I count things when I'm anxious. Candles, windows, buttons on someone's coat, anything with clear boundaries and finite numbers. What makes you anxious? This, all of this. She gestured vaguely toward the ballroom. Rooms full of people performing for each other. Marriages arranged like business transactions. Women pretending to be helpless so men can pretend to be heroes. The entire ridiculous theater of it. Then why come? Because the alternative is staying home with my father, who drinks himself unconscious by noon, and my aunt, who reminds me daily that I'm 24 and running out of time to secure a husband before I become completely unmarketable. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, raw and honest and completely inappropriate for a conversation with a duke she'd met 10 minutes ago. Clara snapped her mouth shut, horrified. Adrian just smoked his cigarette and watched the garden. My father drank too, he said eventually. Started when my mother died. Continued until it killed him 3 years later. I was 14, inherited the title, the estates, the debts, and 1,000 people who depended on me to suddenly become someone I had no idea how to be. Clara's throat tightened. I shouldn't have... You didn't ask for my tragedy. I'm offering it. He flicked ash over the balustrade. We all have them, Miss Whitmore. The question is whether we let them define us or whether we define ourselves in spite of them. And which have you chosen? Both, neither. I'm still deciding. He turned to face her fully. What about you? I chose to stop pretending I want what everyone insists I should want. Marriage to some gentleman who'll tolerate my opinions as long as I produce heirs and manage his household. A life of needlepoint and calling cards and teaching daughters to be smaller than they are. What do you want? The question hung in the cold air between them. Clara realized she was still gripping the balustrade, her knuckles white in the moonlight. I want... She stopped, started again. I want to matter, to do something that leaves a mark on the world beyond embroidered pillows and well-raised children. I want to think thoughts that scare me and say things that make people uncomfortable and live a life that's mine. That's not what society offers women. I know. So you count chandeliers and wear ugly dresses and make yourself difficult to want. Yes. Adrian nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Here's what I want, Miss Whitmore. I want someone to talk to who doesn't perform for me. Someone who'll call me a fool when I'm being foolish, and argue when I'm wrong and not pretend to be less intelligent than they are because my ego requires it. Find a mistress. I don't want a mistress. I want... He paused. I don't have a word for it. A friend feels inadequate. A companion sounds like I'm shopping for a dog. An equal, Clara said quietly. Yes, that. He smiled, and it was nothing like his earlier amusement. This smile was tired and honest and slightly sad. Do you know how rare that is in my world? In any world. Fair point. He finished his cigarette and ground it under his heel. Our 10 minutes are up. Clara glanced toward the ballroom doors. Through the glass, she could see faces turned in their direction, fans fluttering, mouths moving. The gossip machine was already churning. They'll have us engaged by morning, she said, or they'll have you marked as the woman who turned me down. Depends on what story we tell when we go back inside. What story do you want to tell? Adrian looked at her for a long moment. The truth. That I asked you to walk with me, you agreed out of politeness, and we discovered we have nothing in common. That's not entirely true. No? We both count things when we're anxious. Clara surprised herself by smiling. And we both think most of society is performing a rather boring play. Hardly grounds for an engagement. Hardly grounds for continued conversation. Agreed. But he didn't move toward the doors. Neither did Clara. A door slammed somewhere in the house. Music swelled and faded. Clara watched frost form on the roses below, perfect crystals that would melt by morning. I should go back inside, she said. You should. People will talk if we stay out here longer. They're already talking. Clara pushed away from the balustrade. Thank you for the strategic social destruction, Your Grace. Adrian, if we're going to be frank with each other, titles seem excessive. We're not going to be frank with each other. We're not going to be anything with each other. She adjusted her shawl. This was 10 minutes outside the performance. Tomorrow, we go back to playing our parts. Do we? Something in his voice made Clara pause. She looked back and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite parse. Curiosity mixed with something sharper, more intent. Yes, she said firmly. We do. And if I don't want to? Then you'll have to learn disappointment. I hear it's good for character development. She walked toward the ballroom doors before he could respond, before she could change her mind, before the treacherous part of her brain that found him interesting could override the sensible part that knew better. Behind her, she heard him laugh quietly. Clara Whitmore. I'll remember that name. Please don't. But she knew he would, just like she knew she'd remember his, just like she knew, with sick certainty, that her carefully constructed walls had just developed their first crack. The ballroom welcomed her back with a wave of heat and noise. Clara kept her expression neutral as she navigated toward her aunt, who waited near the refreshment table with the look of someone preparing to deliver a lecture. Clara Louise Whitmore. Aunt Margaret's whisper could have cut glass. What were you thinking? I was thinking 10 minutes of fresh air would improve my headache. With the Duke of Thornfield, unchaperoned? We were in full view of the ballroom, hardly unchaperoned. Perception, child. Perception matters more than truth. Margaret's fan snapped open and closed, a nervous habit. Do you have any idea what people are saying? Clara could guess. She'd spent enough seasons watching the gossip machine devour other young women. I imagine they're saying I'm either remarkably clever or remarkably stupid. They're saying he's marked you for his next conquest. Then they'll be disappointed when nothing happens. Nothing, Clara. He's a duke. If he decides he wants you, he can decide whatever he likes. I'm not for sale. Margaret's face paled. Lower your voice. Why? So we can continue pretending that marriages aren't transactions and women aren't merchandise? Clara grabbed a glass of wine from a passing servant, ignoring her aunt's scandalized expression. I'm tired, Aunt Margaret. I'm tired of performing and pretending and making myself smaller so men can feel larger. This is what comes from letting you read philosophy. This is what comes from watching 3 seasons of charades. Clara drained half the wine. I'm 24. My dowry is laughable. My prospects are non-existent. If the Duke of Thornfield actually wanted me, which he doesn't, you should be delighted rather than horrified. I would be delighted if he wanted you for a wife. But men like him don't marry women like you. The words landed like a slap. Clara's fingers tightened on the wine glass. Women like me. You know what I mean. I do. You mean women without impressive dowries or important connections? Women who read too much and talk too much and refuse to simper. Clara set down the glass before she could throw it. Thank you for the clarification, Aunt. Clara, But Clara was already moving, threading through the crowd toward the exit, counting steps instead of candles, focusing on the mechanical act of walking because it was the only thing keeping her from screaming. 32 steps to the entrance hall, 18 more to the cloakroom. She retrieved her wrap and was halfway to the door when a hand caught her elbow. Leaving so soon? Clara spun and found herself facing a woman she recognized from previous balls, Lady Catherine something, a widow who'd attached herself to the Duke's circle with the tenacity of barnacle. "Yes," Clara said flatly, "I have a headache." "I'm sure you do." Catherine's smile was all teeth. 10 minutes alone with Adrian Blackthorne would give anyone a headache. "We were hardly alone." "No, just private enough for him to work his particular magic." Catherine stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming. "Let me give you some advice, Miss Whitmore. Men like the Duke don't pursue women like you for marriage. They pursue them for entertainment. And when the entertainment ends, they move on." Clara yanked her arm free. "Thank you for the warning. I'll be sure to file it with all the other unsolicited advice I've received tonight. Mock me if you like. But when he's finished with you, and he will finish with you, don't say you weren't warned." She swept away in a rustle of expensive silk, leaving Clara standing in the entrance hall with her wrap clutched in white-knuckled hands. The carriage ride home passed in silence. Aunt Margaret stared out the window, lips pressed into a thin line. Clara counted cobblestones visible in the lamplight, trying not to think about storm-gray eyes and cigarette smoke and conversations that felt dangerous, specifically because they'd felt real. Back in her small room in her aunt's townhouse, Clara changed into her nightdress and sat at the window overlooking the street. London sprawled below, gas lamps creating pools of light in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Adrian Blackthorne was probably at his club, or another party, or in the bed of someone who didn't question his motives. Clara pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She'd meant every word she'd said on that terrace. She didn't want the life society prescribed. She didn't want to perform or pretend or make herself smaller. She wanted something real, something that mattered, something beyond endless balls and empty conversations. But wanting and having were different countries, and Clara had learned long ago not to confuse the two. Still, there'd been a moment on that terrace when Adrian had looked at her and she'd seen something beyond his reputation. Not a predator or a prize, but a person, complicated and tired and just as trapped in his own way. It didn't matter. It couldn't matter. Clara closed the curtains and climbed into bed, determined to forget storm-gray eyes and 10 minutes that had felt like a lifetime. But as she drifted towards sleep, she found herself counting again. Not candles or tiles or cobblestones. The number of minutes until she'd have to see him again. The number of conversations it would take to convince herself she didn't want more. The number of ways this could end badly. The mathematics were clear. She was in trouble. The flowers arrived 3 days later. Not roses or lilies or any of the predictable choices that filled London drawing rooms during the season. Instead, Clara found herself staring at a massive arrangement of thistles, Scottish thistles, purple and defiant, and thoroughly unsuitable for polite society. The card read, "For someone who prefers honesty to beauty." Aunt Margaret took one look at them and ordered them removed to the scullery. Clara rescued them after midnight and kept them in her bedroom, where their sharp edges reminded her that some things refused to be tamed. The second delivery came the next morning, a book. Not poetry or romantic nonsense, but a first edition of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, with passages marked in pencil and notes scribbled in the margins. Page 47, one note read. "She's wrong here about education, but her argument about independence is sound. What do you think?" Clara sat at her writing desk for an hour, pen hovering over paper, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't encourage further contact. She failed. By noon, she'd written 3 pages analyzing Wollstonecraft's philosophy and its practical limitations in a society that viewed women as property. She burned the letter before she could send it. The third gift arrived during calling hours, when Aunt Margaret's drawing room was filled with the usual collection of gossips and social climbers. A messenger delivered a small wooden box, unadorned and plain. Inside, wrapped in velvet, Clara found a brass compass. The card, "For when you need to find your way out." Lady Pemberton, who'd positioned herself near enough to observe, sniffed loudly. "The Duke appears to have taken an interest." The Duke appears to have too much time and money, Clara replied, snapping the box shut. 3 gifts in as many days. Most irregular. Most annoying. But she kept the compass, along with the thistles and the book, hidden in her room like contraband. She told herself it meant nothing, that she was simply being practical. Refusing the gifts would cause more gossip than accepting them, that Adrian Blackthorne was playing some game she didn't understand, and the safest response was to ignore him entirely. She almost believed it. Then came the letter. It arrived with the Morning Post, tucked between an invitation to Lady Hartwell's musicale and a bill from the dressmaker. Clara recognized the handwriting immediately, bold and slightly careless, like someone who'd never had to worry about making a good impression. Miss Whitmore, I'm hosting a dinner party Saturday next. Small gathering, interesting people, conversation that might not bore you to tears, no dancing, no performance, no eligible bachelors circling like sharks. Just food and wine and arguments about philosophy. Come, or don't. But if you do come, wear that hideous yellow dress. I've decided I like it. Adrian. Clara read it 3 times, looking for the trap. It had to be a trap. Men like Adrian Blackthorne didn't invite women like her to intimate dinner parties without ulterior motives. Except the letter sounded genuine in its casualness, and the postscript, I promise not to count tiles, made her smile before she could stop herself. Absolutely not. Aunt Margaret's voice cut through Clara's thoughts. She looked up to find her aunt standing in the doorway, face pinched with disapproval. You're not seriously considering accepting? I haven't decided. Then let me decide for you. No. Clara folded the letter carefully. It's a dinner party, with other guests. Hardly scandalous. It's a dinner party at a bachelor's residence, hosted by a man with a reputation for seduction and a clear interest in compromising you. He's not interested in compromising me. Then what is he interested in? Clara opened her mouth and found she didn't have an answer. What did Adrian want? The obvious answer, her virtue, her reputation, another conquest, didn't fit with thistles and philosophy books and invitations to argue about ideas. I don't know, she admitted. Exactly, which is why you're not going. Margaret moved into the room, her skirts rustling with agitation. Clara, please, use your head. The man is dangerous. You think every man is dangerous. Because most of them are, particularly to young women without protection or prospects. Her aunt's voice softened slightly. I know you find society tiresome. I know you want something more than what's being offered. But throwing yourself at the Duke of Thornfield isn't rebellion, it's suicide. I'm not throwing myself at anyone. I'm considering attending a dinner party, where you'll be alone with him, with other guests, who will conveniently disappear after dessert, leaving you compromised and ruined, at which point he'll either abandon you completely or offer a marriage that will make you miserable for the rest of your life. Clara stood abruptly, the letter crumpling in her fist. You have a remarkably cynical view of human nature. I have a realistic view based on 40 years of watching young women destroy themselves over charming men with pretty words. Margaret crossed her arms. He's not special, Clara. He's not different. He's just better at the game than most. Maybe I want to play the game. No, you don't. You want to believe you're smart enough to play without getting played. But nobody's that smart, darling, especially not with men like him. The words stung because they carried truth. Clara turned toward the window, watching rain spatter against the glass. Outside, London looked gray and wet and thoroughly miserable. What if you're wrong? She said quietly. What if he actually means what he says? Then he's a liar who's convinced even himself. Clara closed her eyes. I can't live like this, Aunt Margaret, afraid of every man who shows interest, suspicious of every kind word, building walls so high that nothing good can reach me either. Better walls than ruins. Are they? Because from where I'm standing, they look remarkably similar. The silence that followed was heavy with everything neither of them could say. Margaret had built her own walls after her husband died, retreating into widowhood and social propriety like armor. She'd survived. She'd endured. But Clara had never heard her aunt laugh, not really, and couldn't remember the last time she'd seen genuine joy in those tired eyes. I'm going to the dinner party, Clara said. Then you're a fool. Probably, But I'd rather be a fool who tried than a coward who didn't. Margaret left without another word, her footsteps echoing down the hallway like a judge's gavel. Clara sank back into her chair and smoothed out the crumpled letter, reading it again in the gray morning light. Come, or don't. Such simple words to carry such weight. Saturday arrived wrapped in cold fog that turned London into a ghost city. Clara spent the day in a state of sustained anxiety, changing her mind about attending roughly every 15 minutes. By evening, she'd convinced herself not to go at least 7 times. She went anyway. The yellow dress felt like a statement and a surrender simultaneously. Clara paired it with her mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable thing she owned, and a shawl that had seen better decades. Looking at herself in the mirror, she appeared exactly what she was, a woman trying too hard to look like she wasn't trying at all. The address Adrian had provided led to a townhouse in Mayfair that managed to be both elegant and understated. No ostentatious columns or gilt excess, just clean lines and tasteful restraint that somehow made it more impressive than its neighbor's architectural shouting. A butler answered her knock, his expression so carefully neutral that Clara couldn't tell if her arrival was expected or bewildering. "Miss Clara Whitmore," she said, handing him her card, "for the Duke's dinner party." "Of course, miss. Please, follow me." He led her through an entrance hall decorated with maps, dozens of them, some ancient, some modern, covering walls in a cartographic collage that should have looked chaotic, but somehow didn't. Clara found herself slowing to examine a map of the Scottish Highlands, her fingers itching to trace the routes marked in faded ink. Impressive, isn't it? She spun to find Adrian descending the staircase, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. No formal coat, just shirt sleeves and a waistcoat that looked comfortable rather than fashionable. He'd rolled his cuffs to his elbows, and Clara noticed ink stains on his fingers. "You collect maps," she said, because it seemed safer than acknowledging how different he looked outside ballroom lighting. "I collect routes out." He reached the bottom of the stairs and gestured toward the nearest wall. "Every one of these represents someone's escape or expedition. Magellan circumnavigating the globe, Lewis and Clark crossing America, Burton searching for the Nile. Men who refused to stay where they were told to stay." "And women?" "What? Were there women who escaped, or do your maps only track male rebellion?" Adrian's smile was slow and genuine. "You wore the yellow dress. You asked me to." "I did. And you came anyway, despite it being obviously tactical suicide." He offered his arm. "I'm glad." Clara hesitated, then took it. His forearm was solid under her fingers, warm through the linen. "Where are the other guests?" "Delayed." Her stomach dropped. "Delayed." "Fog. Apparently half of London is trapped between here and there." He led her toward a doorway. "But dinner's ready, and I hate eating alone, so you'll have to tolerate my company exclusively for at least the first course." "This is exactly what your aunt warned you about. I know. You're welcome to leave." Clara stopped walking. "Are they actually delayed, or did you plan this?" Adrian turned to face her fully, still holding her arm but making no move to pull her closer. "They're actually delayed. I have witnesses. My housekeeper received 3 separate messages within the last hour, but if you want to believe I orchestrated London fog to get you alone, I won't argue. It makes me sound more competent than I am. You're asking me to stay for dinner, unchaperoned. I'm asking you to make a choice, stay and eat with me, knowing tomorrow's gossip will be vicious. Or leave now and we'll pretend this never happened." His eyes searched hers. "What do you want, Clara?" The question again. What did she want? Not what was safe, not what was proper, not what Aunt Margaret would approve of. What did Clara Whitmore, 24 and running out of time and so tired of counting things, actually want? "I want dinner," she heard herself say, "and conversation, and you to stop looking at me like I'm a puzzle you're trying to solve." "I'll try. No promises on that last one." The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate rather than impressive. A single table set for 8 now looked almost comically oversized with just 2 place settings. Adrian caught her expression and laughed. "Ridiculous, isn't it? I'll have them move us to the library, more comfortable." "You have a library." "Don't sound so surprised. Some of us read. Dukes aren't generally known for their intellectual pursuits." Dukes aren't generally known for anything except spending money and producing heirs. Low bar to clear. 20 minutes later, Clara found herself in what might have been the most beautiful room she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace large enough to stand in, chairs that looked like they'd been selected for comfort rather than fashion, and a small table now set for two near the windows. Better? Adrian asked, pouring wine. Dangerously better. Because? Because this feels real, and real things are more dangerous than performances. He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing briefly. To dangerous realities, then. They drank. The wine was good. Better than good, actually, rich and complex in ways that made Clara suspect it cost more than her entire wardrobe. She took another sip and tried not to think about how thoroughly she'd walked into exactly the situation Aunt Margaret had warned against. Dinner appeared in courses delivered by near-silent servants who vanished as quickly as they'd arrived. The food was excellent, but Clara barely tasted it, too aware of Adrian across the table watching her with that unsettling focus. "Stop," she said finally. "Stop what?" "Looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm the most interesting thing you've encountered all week." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "You are the most interesting thing I've encountered all week. Possibly all month. You showed up wearing a dress you hate because I asked you to, knowing it would cause scandal, and you're eating dinner in a bachelor's library like you couldn't care less about propriety." "Maybe I don't care about propriety." "Oh, you care. You just care about other things more." He swirled wine in his glass. "Tell me about Wollstonecraft." The conversational pivot caught her off guard. "What?" "The book I sent. You read it. I can tell by how you didn't thank me, which means it affected you enough that you didn't know what to say. So tell me, what did you think?" Clara set down her fork. "I think she's right about women's capacity for reason and wrong about how to achieve equality. Education alone won't dismantle a system built on women's subordination. You need structural change, legal reform, complete reimagining of gender roles. Ambitious? Necessary, and impossible given current circumstances. Everything's impossible until someone makes it possible." Clara heard the heat in her own voice and tried to moderate it. "Sorry, I get passionate about this. Don't apologize. Passion's rare." Adrian leaned forward. "Most people I know are passionate about hunting or horses or making money. You're passionate about ideas that could actually change things. That's—" He paused. "Intimidating, actually." "I intimidate you?" "Terrify me. You have convictions. I have opinions. There's a difference." Clara studied him across the table. "Why did you really invite me here?" "I told you. Interesting conversation." There are dozens of women in London who could provide interesting conversation without risking your reputation or mine. Name one. Lady Caroline Ashford is known for her wit. Her wit consists of clever cruelty. Next. Miss Pemberton reads extensively. Miss Pemberton reads what she's told to read and thinks what she's told to think. Next. Lady Catherine is a social climber who would agree with me if I declared the sky green. Adrian shook his head. "You're not understanding. I don't want someone who can hold interesting conversation. I want someone who will tell me when I'm wrong, argue when I'm foolish, and not pretend to be less intelligent than they are because my ego requires it." "You said that before, on the terrace." "And I meant it. Clara, I spend my days surrounded by people who need things from me. My vote, my money, my influence, my name. Everyone wants something, and they'll perform whatever role necessary to get it. You're the first person I've met in years who genuinely doesn't seem to want anything from me. Maybe I'm just better at hiding it. Maybe. But I don't think so." He refilled her wine glass. "I think you looked at me and saw a title and a reputation and decided I wasn't worth the trouble, which is either the smartest or stupidest thing anyone's done in years." Still deciding which? Leaning toward smart. Definitely leaning toward smart. They talked through 3 more courses and 2 bottles of wine. The conversation ranged from philosophy to politics to a surprisingly heated debate about whether Byron's poetry was brilliant or self-indulgent nonsense. Clara argued for self-indulgent nonsense. Adrian defended brilliance. They agreed to disagree and moved on to discussing the recent scandals in Parliament. Somewhere around the fourth course, Clara realized she'd stopped counting things. No tiles, no books on shelves, no patterns in the carpet. Just conversation that felt like fencing, parry and thrust, advance and retreat, both of them testing each other's defenses without drawing real blood. "I should go," she said eventually, noticing the clock showed nearly midnight. "I've stayed far too long." "Yes, you have. Your reputation is thoroughly compromised by now. You seem pleased about that." "I'm pleased you stayed anyway." Adrian stood and offered his hand. "Walk with me." "Where?" "Just to the door. 5 minutes. Unless you're afraid of me?" Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "I'm not afraid of you." Liar. They walked back through the map-covered entrance hall, their footsteps echoing in the late-night quiet. At the door, Adrian's butler materialized with Clara's wrap, then vanished again with impressive discretion. "Thank you for dinner," Clara said, the formality feeling absurd after hours of intimate conversation. "Thank you for staying." Adrian helped her with the wrap, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. "Will I see you again?" "At the next ball, probably." "That's not what I mean." Clara turned to face him. They stood close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the slight shadows beneath them that suggested he slept as poorly as she did. "What do you want from me, Adrian?" "I don't know." That's what's terrifying. His hand came up to brush her cheek, so gently it might have been imagined. "I just know I want more of this. This will destroy me." "I know." "And you don't care?" "I care desperately. That's the problem." He stepped back, breaking the moment. "Go home, Clara, before I do something unforgivable." She should have left then, should have walked out the door and never looked back. Instead, she said, "What if I don't want to be protected from unforgivable things?" The words hung between them like a blade. Adrian's jaw tightened and Clara saw something flash in his eyes, want and restraint, and something darker she couldn't name. "Go," he said roughly. "Now, please." Clara went, but as the carriage pulled away, she looked back to see him standing in the doorway, backlit and alone, and realized with sick certainty that she was already in too deep to escape unscathed. The gossip hit like a flood the next morning. Clara Whitmore, alone with the Duke of Thornfield until midnight. No other guests. No chaperone. The implications were clear, vicious, and spread through London society faster than cholera. By noon, Aunt Margaret had received 7 calls from concerned friends. By evening, they'd been uninvited from 2 upcoming events. By the following morning, Clara's mailbox contained 3 letters, 2 expressing sympathy for her predicament, and 1 stating flatly that she was no longer welcome at Lady Ashford's household. "Are you satisfied?" Margaret demanded, throwing the letters on Clara's breakfast table. "You've ruined yourself, completely and thoroughly ruined." Clara stirred her tea calmly. "I had dinner. That's hardly scandalous." "You had dinner alone with a notorious libertine in his private residence. That's the definition of scandalous," her aunt's voice cracked. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking I wanted interesting conversation with an intelligent person, and I got it." "You got yourself marked as his whore, Clara. That's what you got." The word landed like a slap. Clara set down her spoon carefully. "I'm not his anything. Society says otherwise. And what society says becomes truth, whether you like it or not." "Then society is wrong." "Society doesn't care about right or wrong. It cares about appearances, and you've given them an appearance they'll feast on for months." Margaret sank into the opposite chair. "He hasn't called. He hasn't written. He's abandoned you exactly as I predicted." The words hurt more than Clara wanted to admit. 4 days had passed since that dinner, and Adrian had indeed been silent. No flowers, no books, no carefully worded notes. Just silence that felt louder than any accusation. "Perhaps he's giving the gossip time to die down," Clara said, not believing it. "Perhaps he's got what he wanted and moved on." "He didn't. We didn't. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what people think happened." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Pack your things. We're leaving for Derbyshire tomorrow." Clara's head snapped up. "What?" "Your father's expecting us. You'll stay there for the remainder of the season, By next year, this will be old scandal, and we can attempt to rehabilitate your reputation. I'm not running away. You're not running. You're making a strategic retreat. Her aunt stood wearily. Please, Clara, for once, just do as I ask. But Clara couldn't retreat. Wouldn't. Not because she believed Adrian would suddenly appear with explanations and apologies, but because running felt like admitting defeat. She'd made her choice. Stupid, reckless, dangerous, and she'd face the consequences rather than hide from them. The letter came that evening, delivered by a street boy rather than a proper messenger. Clara tipped him generously and broke the seal with shaking hands. Clara, I've made everything worse. I know that. The gossip is my fault, and you're paying the price for my selfishness. I should apologize. I should write something noble about protecting your reputation and staying away for your own good. I can't. I won't. Because the truth is, I don't regret that dinner, and I don't regret any of it, and the only thing I regret is not kissing you when I had the chance. Meet me. Thursday night, St. James Park, Eastgate at midnight. Come alone or don't come at all. Clara read it 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was madness. Absolute madness. Meeting a man alone at midnight in a public park crossed every line of propriety that still remained uncrossed. Which is why, when Thursday arrived and midnight approached, Clara found herself slipping out of her aunt's townhouse dressed in dark clothing and heading towards street. James Park like a thief or a fool or both. The park after midnight belonged to shadows and streetwalkers and the occasional constable. Clara kept to the darker paths, her heart in her throat, every sound making her jump. This was how women got murdered in the sensational novels. This was stupidity bordering on suicidal. She kept walking. The east gate loomed ahead, iron and forbidding in the darkness. No sign of Adrian. Clara checked her pocket watch. 12:03. Maybe he wasn't coming. Maybe this was all some cruel joke, revenge for whatever embarrassment she'd caused him. You came. She spun to find him emerging from behind a tree, dressed as casually as she'd ever seen him. No coat, no cravat, just dark clothes that made him nearly invisible in the shadows. You sound surprised, Clara managed. I am. I thought you'd choose sense over recklessness. I'm here, aren't I? You're here. He moved closer, close enough that she could see his face in the dim lamplight. He looked awful, exhausted and ragged and like he hadn't slept since that dinner. I shouldn't have asked you to come. Then why did you? Because I'm selfish and weak and I needed to see you. His voice was raw. Clara, the gossip, I know about the gossip. It's destroyed your reputation. I know that too. And you're not angry? Clara laughed bitterly. I'm furious, but not at you. At myself for being stupid enough to think I could have something real without paying for it. Adrian flinched like she'd hit him. You think that's what this is? Me taking something from you? Isn't it? No, Clara, it's... He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what it is. I just know I can't stop thinking about you. That dinner, that conversation, the way you argue and challenge and refuse to pretend. You're in my head constantly, and it's driving me insane. That's not love. That's obsession. Maybe obsession is just love before it learns its name. The words hung in the cold air between them. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to so badly it physically hurt. Lady Catherine visited yesterday, she said instead. She was very helpful, explained exactly what kind of woman accepts private dinner invitations from notorious dukes. The word whore came up several times. Adrian's face darkened. Catherine is a bitter woman who's probably right. About me, about this, about everything. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I knew the risks. I went anyway. That makes me either brave or stupid, and I'm increasingly thinking it's the latter. You're not stupid. No, then what am I? Extraordinary. He closed the remaining distance between them. You're extraordinary, Clara, and terrifying, and I have absolutely no idea what to do with you. You could try leaving me alone. I've tried. 4 days of trying. It doesn't work. Try harder. I can't. His hands came up to frame her face, and Clara stopped breathing. I can't stop. not without knowing if he kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, but with the desperate intensity of someone who'd been holding back for far too long. His mouth claimed hers with bruising force, all restraint abandoned, and Clara felt something inside her snap and surrender simultaneously. She kissed him back, her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the world narrowed to his taste, wine and smoke and something indefinably him. Adrian made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back. This was ruin. This was stupidity. This was everything Clara had sworn to avoid. She didn't care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian pressed his forehead against hers. "Come with me." "What?" "Not like that. I mean," he pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Leave London. Come to Thornfield with me, my estate in Northumberland. We'll avoid the gossip, let things settle, and actually figure out what this is without society watching every move." Clara's mind reeled. "You're asking me to—" "I'm asking you to trust me, to give us, a real chance away from rumors and performances." "That's insane." "Probably. People will think, they already think. At least this way we'll know the truth." "Adrian, I can't just disappear with you to Northumberland. My aunt, my reputation, are already destroyed." His hands tightened on her arms. "Clara, you have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Come with me. And if this doesn't work, if you tire of me in a month, then I'll bring you back to London, set you up with a house and an income, and make sure you're cared for." The words should have reassured her. Instead, they felt like stones in her stomach. "So I become your kept woman. You become my partner, in whatever form that takes." Clara pulled away, her head spinning. This was happening too fast, pushing too hard, demanding decisions she wasn't prepared to make. But Adrian was right about one thing. She had nothing left to lose. Her reputation was ashes. Her prospects were non-existent. And the alternative was retreating to Derbyshire to live out her days as the cautionary tale young women told each other. 24 hours, she said. "What?" "Give me 24 hours to think about it, to settle things with my aunt, to decide if I'm brave enough for this." Adrian's expression was unreadable in the darkness. "And if you decide you're not? Then you'll never see me again, and we'll both wonder what might have been." "I don't want to wonder." "Then give me 24 hours to be sure." He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her lower lip. 24 hours. "But Clara, if you say yes, if you choose this, there's no going back. You understand that?" "I understand." But as Clara walked home through the empty streets, her lips still burning from his kiss, she realized she understood nothing at all. Not what Adrian wanted, not what she wanted, not how any of this could possibly end in anything except disaster. She had 24 hours to decide her fate. The mathematics had never been less clear. Clara didn't sleep. She lay in bed watching shadows crawl across her ceiling while her mind ran calculations that refused to balance. Every path forward led to disaster: stay in London and face social death, flee to Derbyshire and live as a cautionary tale, or follow Adrian north and become exactly what society already believed her to be. 24 hours. She'd asked for time to think, but thinking only made everything worse. By dawn, she'd made her decision. By breakfast, she'd started to doubt it. By noon, when Aunt Margaret knocked on her door with news that changed everything, Clara's carefully constructed plans shattered completely. "There's someone here to see you," Margaret said, her voice strange and tight. "In the drawing room." "Who?" "Lord Wickham." Clara's stomach dropped. James Wickham, her father's cousin and heir to the Derbyshire estate. She hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since her father's health had begun its decline, and Wickham had started circling like a vulture waiting for death. "What does he want?" "To discuss your future," apparently. Margaret's expression was unreadable. "He's brought his solicitor." Nothing good ever came with solicitors. Clara dressed quickly and descended to find Wickham sprawled in her aunt's best chair like he owned it. He'd gotten fatter since their last meeting, his waistcoat straining against his belly, but his eyes were as calculating as she remembered. "Clara." He didn't stand. "You're looking well. considering. Considering what? Your recent scandals. London's been quite talkative about your exploits with the Duke of Thornfield. He smiled, showing yellowed teeth. Shocking behavior for an unmarried woman. Your father would be appalled. My father is still alive. Barely. Which brings me to why I'm here. Wickham gestured to the thin man beside him. Mr. Graves, explain the situation. The solicitor cleared his throat nervously. Your father's health has deteriorated significantly. The doctors give him perhaps 6 months. Upon his death, the estate passes to Lord Wickham per the entailment. Your father's will provides you with an annuity of £50 annually. £50. Barely enough to rent a room, let alone maintain any semblance of independence. However, Wickham interjected, I'm prepared to be generous. Marry me, and you'll remain mistress of your childhood home. You'll have security, position, and protection from the consequences of your recent idiocy. Clara stared at him. You're proposing? I'm offering a solution. You're damaged goods now. No respectable man will have you, but I need a wife to manage the estate and produce an heir. We both get what we need. I don't need you. No? Then what exactly do you need? Your Duke certainly isn't offering marriage. Men like Blackthorn don't marry their whores. Clara's hand moved before her mind could stop it. A sharp crack across Wickham's face that left her palm stinging and his cheek blazing red. The room went silent. Wickham touched his face slowly, his expression shifting from shock to something uglier. You'll regret that. I already regret not hitting you harder. Careful, cousin. You're in no position to make enemies. He stood, straightening his waistcoat. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider. After that, my offer expires and you can starve in whatever gutter Blackthorn tosses you into when he's finished. He left, Graves scurrying after him. Clara remained standing in the center of the room, her hand still throbbing, her mind reeling with implications. You shouldn't have struck him, Margaret said quietly from the doorway. Probably not. He's vindictive. He'll make things worse. Things can't get worse. But she was wrong. Things could always get worse. The next blow came that evening in the form of a letter delivered by Adrian's own messenger. Clara's hand shook as she broke the seal. Clara, I've just learned something that changes everything. Lady Catherine has been spreading a particularly vicious rumor that you engineered our entire acquaintance as a deliberate trap, that you deliberately compromised yourself to force my hand into marriage. I don't believe it. I need you to know I don't believe it, but others do, and the damage is spreading fast. Lord Hartwell called today to warn me about your schemes. 3 other men have done the same. This is worse than I thought. The gossip isn't just about impropriety, it's about calculation and manipulation. They're painting you as a fortune hunter who targeted me specifically. We can't leave for Thornfield, not yet. I need to address this directly, publicly refute the rumors before they destroy any chance we have. Give me 1 more week. Clara read it twice, then crumpled it slowly. 1 more week, 7 more days of being the scandal, the cautionary tale, the woman so desperate she'd engineered her own ruin to trap a duke. She wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. A knock on her door made her look up. Margaret entered without waiting for permission, her face pale. Pack your things. Tonight. What? Lord Wickham came back. He's filed a formal complaint with the magistrate claiming you assaulted him. It's nonsense. He won't pursue it seriously, but he's making noise, gathering attention. Her aunt moved to the wardrobe and began pulling out dresses. We need to leave London immediately. I'm not running from Wickham. This isn't about Wickham. It's about survival. Margaret turned and Clara saw something she'd never seen before in her aunt's eyes, genuine fear. Clara, you don't understand how bad this has become. The rumors about you and the Duke, now this assault claim, the whispers about entrapment, you're becoming a spectacle, the kind of spectacle that destroys lives. Let them talk. They're not just talking. Lady Ashford's son challenged another man to a duel this morning over an argument about your character. Lord Pemberton tried to have you banned from every respectable establishment in London. You're not just scandal anymore. You're becoming dangerous to know. Clara sank onto her bed. What are you saying? I'm saying if you stay in London, someone will get hurt. Or worse, Margaret's voice cracked. Please, come to Derbyshire. Let this blow over. And what happens in Derbyshire? Wickham's there, waiting to make my life hell. Father's dying. I have no prospects, no future, nothing. You have your life. That's more than you'll have if you stay here." Before Clara could respond, another knock, this time urgent, almost frantic. Their housekeeper burst in without preamble. "Miss Clara, there's a crowd outside." "A crowd?" 20 people at least, maybe more. They're shouting things, saying— The woman's voice dropped. "Saying terrible things, miss. About you and the Duke. Someone threw a rock through the drawing-room window." Clara moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. Below, in the street lit by gas lamps, a mob had gathered. Not the poor or desperate. These were respectable people, well-dressed men and women, united by righteous anger and the thrill of moral outrage. "Whore!" someone shouted. "Blackthorn strumpet! Shame! Shame!" Clara let the curtain fall. Her hands were steady now, her mind suddenly clear. She'd spent 24 hours trying to decide her future. The mob had decided for her. "I'm leaving," she said. Margaret exhaled in relief. Not for Derbyshire, for Thornfield." "Clara, I can't stay here. You said it yourself. I'm dangerous to know. But if I'm going to be destroyed anyway, I'd rather be destroyed for actually making the choice than for something I haven't even done yet. Adrian asked you to wait." "Adrian doesn't get to make that decision. I do." Clara moved to her wardrobe and began pulling out practical clothes, traveling dress, warm cloak, sturdy boots. "I'm going north tonight, alone. And everyone here can think whatever they want to think." This is madness. Everything's madness now. At least this madness is mine. Margaret watched her pack with an expression somewhere between horror and admiration. "You'll need money. I have some saved. Not enough for traveling alone. Here." She pressed a purse into Clara's hands. "Everything I have. Take it." "I can't." "You can, and you will. And you'll take my pistol, too." Margaret moved to her own room and returned with a small leather case. Inside was a dueling pistol, polished and clearly maintained. "It was my husband's. I kept it after he died, loaded. Do you know how to use it?" Clara stared at the weapon. "Point and shoot?" "Near enough. Keep it hidden, but accessible." Her aunt's hands trembled as she closed the case. "Clara, what you're doing, leaving alone, traveling without escort, it's incredibly dangerous." "More dangerous than staying here with a mob throwing rocks?" "Different dangerous. Roads are treacherous. Inns are full of men who will see a woman alone and think—" She stopped. "Just be careful. Trust no one." Clara tucked the pistol case into her traveling bag along with money, spare clothes, and the brass compass Adrian had given her. Looking at it now, for when you need to find your way out, she wondered if he'd known it would come to this. Below, the mob's shouting intensified. Someone was singing a bawdy song with Clara's name substituted for the original subject. The sound made her skin crawl. "How do I get out without them seeing?" Margaret thought for a moment. "Kitchen door. Leads to the alley behind the house. If you're quick, you can reach the coaching inn on Charles Street before anyone notices." They descended through the servants' quarters, past wide-eyed staff who'd heard everything. Clara tried to feel ashamed and couldn't. She was too angry, too exhausted, too far past caring what anyone thought. At the kitchen door, Margaret pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Right when you get there, let me know you're safe." "I will." "And Clara, whatever happens with the Duke," she pulled back, eyes wet. "Don't lose yourself trying to become what he wants. You're worth more than that." "I know." But she wasn't sure she did. Not anymore. The alley was dark and rank with garbage. Clara kept one hand on her bag and the pistol inside as she hurried toward Charles Street. Behind her, the mob's noise faded to a dull roar, then to nothing as she put distance between herself and her aunt's house. The coaching inn was crowded with late-night travelers. Clara approached the ticket counter with as much confidence as she could manufacture. "Next coach to York?" The clerk looked her up and down. "Traveling alone, miss?" "My husband's meeting me there. Business kept him longer than expected." Lies came easily now. That should have bothered her more than it did. "Next coach leaves at dawn, £2.06. Clara paid without haggling. The clerk handed her a ticket and gestured toward the waiting room, a cramped space full of travelers sleeping in chairs or on the floor. She found a corner, pulled her cloak tight, and tried to become invisible. The hours until dawn crawled past. Clara dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, her hand always near the pistol. Around her, humanity in all its varieties: merchants traveling for business, families relocating, laborers seeking work. No one paid her particular attention, and for that she was grateful. The coach finally arrived as gray light filtered through grimy windows. Clara climbed aboard with 6 other passengers: 2 merchants, a laborer, an elderly woman, a young couple, and a man whose profession Clara couldn't determine and didn't want to know. They lurched into motion. London fell away behind them, replaced by countryside that grew increasingly wild and empty as they traveled north. Each coaching inn brought fresh horses and the same suspicious looks when Clara climbed down alone. She invented a husband in Manchester, then changed it to Newcastle when someone asked uncomfortable questions. By the second day, exhaustion had stripped away her defenses. She slept sitting up, startling awake at every stop, eating whatever food the inns provided without tasting it. The other passengers changed at various stops, replaced by new faces, new suspicions. It was at a coaching inn outside Durham that things went wrong. Clara had just finished a meager dinner and was heading back to the coach when someone grabbed her arm from behind. She spun to find the man from the first coach, the one whose profession she couldn't determine, standing too close. "No husband, is there?" His breath reeked of gin. "I've been watching, no one meeting you, no one sending word ahead." Clara yanked her arm free. "Unhand me!" "Pretty thing like you traveling alone. That's either desperate or dangerous." His smile showed missing teeth. "Which are you?" "Neither. Now excuse me." She tried to move past him, but he blocked her path. Behind him, 2 more men had materialized. Friends or opportunists, Clara couldn't tell and didn't care. "Maybe we should keep her company," one of them said. "Make sure she's safe." Clara's hand slipped into her bag and closed around the pistol case. "I said excuse me." "Or what? You'll scream? Look around, sweetheart. No one here cares what happens to a woman traveling alone." He was right. The inn yard was full of people, but all of them were suddenly very interested in their own business. No eye contact, no intervention, just the willful blindness that allowed horrible things to happen in full view. Clara pulled out the pistol. The 3 men froze. So did everyone else in the yard. Clara had never held a gun before, never wanted to, but desperation made a quick teacher. She cocked the hammer the way she'd seen her father do when scaring off poachers. "Step back," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "All of you, now." "Easy, miss." The first man raised his hands but didn't retreat. "We were just talking. And now we're done talking. Move." "You won't shoot. Women don't—" Clara fired into the ground at his feet. The explosion was deafening. Horses shrieked, people scattered. The man jumped back with a curse, staring at the smoking hole in the dirt between his boots. Clara kept the pistol level, even though her ears were ringing and her hand was shaking. "Next one goes higher. Anyone want to test me?" No one did. The 3 men melted away into the crowd. The inn stableman appeared, looking between Clara and the smoking ground with wide eyes. "Miss, you can't—" "The next coach north. When does it leave?" 20 minutes, but I'll be on it. And if anyone tries to stop me, I'll shoot them too." She didn't remember climbing onto the coach. Didn't remember the journey resuming. She just sat in her corner, clutching the empty pistol, and tried not to think about how close she'd come to something infinitely worse than scandal. The elderly woman across from her leaned forward. "That was brave, dear." "That was stupid." "Sometimes they're the same thing." The woman offered a flask. "Brandy, you look like you need it." Clara drank. The alcohol burned but steadied her. "Thank you." "Where are you going?" "Thornfield, in Northumberland." "Long way for a woman alone." "Everything's a long way when you're alone." The woman studied her for a long moment. "Running to something or from something?" "Both." "Fair enough. Here's advice then. When you get where you're going, don't tell them about the pistol. Men don't like women who can protect themselves. Makes them feel unnecessary." Clara looked at the empty gun in her lap. "What if I want them to feel unnecessary?" "Then you're smarter than most. But smart women end up lonely. Worth remembering. The coach rolled on through the night. Clara watched darkness flow past the window and wondered if the woman was right. If choosing yourself meant choosing solitude. If refusing to need anyone meant never being needed in return. The answer probably didn't matter. She was already committed. Thornfield appeared on the fourth morning like something from a fever dream. A massive stone manor house perched on a hill overlooking miles of windswept moorland. It looked ancient and forbidding and thoroughly indifferent to human comfort. The coach dropped her at the village inn 2 miles from the estate. Clara stood in the road with her single bag and empty pistol and tried to remember why she'd thought this was a good idea. "Can I help you, miss?" The innkeeper had emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. "Lost?" "I need to get to Thornfield Manor, the Duke's residence." His expression shifted from helpful to suspicious. "Business with the Duke?" "Personal business. He's not here. Left for London yesterday in a hurry. Some emergency." Clara's stomach dropped. "He's gone?" "Aye, and the house is closed up tight. Just caretaker staff." The innkeeper looked her up and down. "Maybe you should wait at the inn. I have a room." "I need to go to the house. It's 2 miles, uphill, and there's weather coming." He gestured at the sky, which had gone the color of old bruises. "Storm's rolling in off the sea. Big one from the looks. I'll manage." "Suit yourself, but when you're soaked and lost on the moor, don't say I didn't warn you." Clara started walking. Her bag grew heavier with each step. The wind picked up, cutting through her cloak with ease. Behind her, the village disappeared into mist. Ahead, Thornfield loomed closer, but somehow no more welcoming. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain hit as she reached the manor's gates. By the time she'd struggled up the drive, it was a downpour. Clara hammered on the massive front door, her clothes already soaked through, her teeth chattering. No answer. She tried again, harder. "Hello? Anyone?" Nothing. The house stood dark and silent, windows like dead eyes. Clara tried the door. Locked. She moved around the building, testing windows, looking for any way in. All locked. All sealed. The storm intensified, wind now strong enough to make her stagger. Finally, she found a ground-floor window with a loose latch. Clara forced it open, climbed through, and tumbled onto a dusty floor. She lay there for a moment, catching her breath, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. She'd broken into the Duke of Thornfield's manor house, added breaking and entering to her growing list of crimes. If Aunt Margaret could see her now, she'd probably have a heart attack. The thought made Clara laugh, high and slightly hysterical. She was alone in a stranger's house, soaking wet and freezing, with no idea what to do next. Her brilliant plan to escape London had deposited her exactly nowhere, with nothing, dependent on a man who wasn't even here. She found a parlor with a fireplace and managed to get a fire going with matches from her bag. Then she stripped off her wet clothes and hung them near the flames, wrapping herself in dusty curtains like some tragic opera heroine. The absurdity of it all hit her then. Clara Whitmore, former respectable woman, now sitting naked in a stolen curtain before a fire in a house she'd broken into, waiting for a man who didn't know she was coming. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Clara finally let herself cry, for her lost reputation, her absent Duke, her uncertain future, and the girl she'd been 4 weeks ago, who'd counted chandeliers and thought the worst thing that could happen was boredom. That girl was gone. In her place sat someone Clara didn't quite recognize, someone who'd fired a pistol at a man's feet and broken into a manor house and traveled hundreds of miles alone because the alternative was accepting defeat. The question was whether this new person was brave or just broken. Clara fed more wood to the fire and tried not to think about the answer. She must have fallen asleep because she woke to the sound of horses and shouting outside. Clara scrambled to her feet, clutching the curtain around herself, her heart hammering. The front door crashed open. "Clara!" Adrian's voice, raw and desperate. Clara ran toward it, nearly tripping over the curtain, and found him in the entrance hall, soaked to the bone, wild-eyed, with 2 servants behind him looking equally drenched and exhausted. "Adrian!" He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and grabbed her shoulders. "What the hell were you thinking? Do you have any idea what I thought when your aunt's letter reached me? When I heard you'd left London alone? I've been riding for 2 days straight trying to catch you." "You came after me?" "Of course I came after you. You vanished into the night with a mob outside your house and a threat on your head and no protection, and he stopped, seeming to notice for the first time that she was wearing a curtain. Why are you naked? My clothes are wet. I broke in through a window. You what? The door was locked. I needed shelter, so I broke in. Clara laughed, still slightly hysterical. Add it to my list of crimes. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing too, exhausted and relieved and slightly unhinged. You broke into my house. I did. Traveled hundreds of miles alone. Yes. With a mob after you and nowhere to go. Yes. You're insane. Probably. He kissed her then, desperate and fierce and tasting of rain, his hands tangled in the curtain while hers fisted in his soaked coat, and for a moment everything else disappeared. The scandal, the distance, the uncertainty. All of it drowned under the simple fact that they were here, together, alive. When they finally broke apart, Adrian pressed his forehead against hers. I saw Lady Catherine before I left London. Clara stiffened. Why? To get the truth about the rumors she'd been spreading. About you supposedly trapping me. His hands tightened on her arms. She confessed, all of it. Said she'd invented the story because she was angry I'd rejected her advances. She wanted to destroy us both. That doesn't change what people believe. No, but it changes what I know and what I can prove. He pulled back enough to look at her properly. Clara, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to go back to London and force Catherine to publicly retract everything. I'll make society see the truth. I don't care what society sees. What? I don't care anymore. Let them think what they want. I didn't come here to wait for you to fix my reputation. I came here because I chose to, because staying in London meant becoming smaller and smaller until I disappeared completely. Clara met his eyes. I chose you. Not your title, not your protection, not what you could do for me. Just you. And if that makes me ruined, then I'm ruined. Adrian looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You mean that? Every word. Then marry me. The words hung in the air between them. Claire's breath caught. What? Marry me. Not because it fixes scandal or protects your reputation. Because I want to spend the rest of my life arguing with you about philosophy and watching you count things when you're nervous and learning how to be the person you make me want to be. He cupped her face in his hands. Marry me, Clara Whitmore. Make an honest man out of me. Clara wanted to say yes. The word was right there, ready to tumble out. Instead, she said, Ask me again in the morning. Why? Because we're both exhausted and soaked and probably not thinking clearly. Ask me in the morning when we've slept and the storm has passed and we can actually think straight. If you still want to marry me, then... She smiled. I'll give you an answer. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he kissed her forehead gently. Fair enough. Morning it is. But Clara? Yes? The answer better be yes. She laughed despite everything. We'll see. But as servants appeared to prepare rooms and dry clothes, as Adrian disappeared to change and Clara was led to a proper bedroom with a proper bed, she already knew what her answer would be. She'd count the hours until morning, calculate the risks and rewards, consider every angle, and when dawn came, she'd say yes, because sometimes mathematics led to certainty, and sometimes, rarely, beautifully, it led to faith. Clara fell asleep with the storm still raging outside and woke to a silence so complete it felt ominous. She dressed quickly and borrowed clothes, too large but dry, and went searching for Adrian. She found him in the study, standing at the window. Something in his posture made her stop in the doorway. Adrian? He turned and Clara's breath caught at his expression. There's been news from London, he said quietly. A messenger arrived an hour ago. I didn't want to wake you. What news? Lord Wickham has filed formal charges against you. Not just assault. Theft. He claims you stole valuables from your father's estate before fleeing London. His jaw tightened. It's lies. All of it. But he has witnesses who will swear to it, and the magistrate has issued a warrant. Claire's legs gave out. She caught herself on the doorframe. A warrant. If you return to London, you'll be arrested. But I know. But Wickham has money and connections and a vendetta. And you're... He stopped. I'm what? A woman with no credibility? A scandal who no one will defend? Adrian crossed to her, hands gentle on her shoulders. You're someone I'm going to protect, no matter what it takes. But Clara heard what he didn't say. Heard the impossible math of her situation. She couldn't go back to London without facing arrest. Couldn't stay here without proving every terrible thing people believed about her. Couldn't marry Adrian without destroying him too. She'd run from the mob, from scandal, from society's judgment. But some things, apparently, could chase you anywhere, even to the edge of the world, even to the heart of a storm. What do we do? She whispered. Adrian's answer was drowned by a crash from the entrance hall, the front door slamming open, footsteps, voices raised in authority. Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Thornfield! They both turned to see a constable entering, flanked by two men in official dress. Behind them, looking triumphant and vicious, stood Lord Wickham. I'm here for Clara Whitmore, the constable announced. Under warrant for theft and assault. She's to be taken into custody immediately. Clara felt the world tilt. This couldn't be happening. Wickham couldn't have traveled this far, this fast. I sent word the moment I learned she'd fled north, Wickham said, reading her expression. Did you think I'd let you escape justice, cousin? Adrian moved in front of Clara, blocking her from view. She's under my protection. Your protection doesn't supersede the law, Your Grace. Step aside. No. The constable's hand went to his club. I don't want trouble, sir. But I have my orders. Clara watched it all unfold like a nightmare. Adrian refusing to move, the constable advancing, Wickham's satisfied smile. In that moment, she understood exactly how this would end. Adrian would fight. He'd use his title, his influence, everything he had to protect her. And in doing so, he'd destroy himself. She couldn't let that happen. Adrian, she said quietly, let them take me. What? No. Let them take me. She stepped out from behind him, meeting the constable's eyes. I'll go peacefully. No struggle. Clara, don't. This is my choice. She looked at Adrian, trying to memorize his face. Trust me, please. She didn't wait for his response. She walked forward, allowed the constable to bind her wrists, and let herself be led from Thornfield Manor into the cold morning light. Behind her, she heard Adrian shouting, promising, swearing he'd fix this. But Clara knew some things were beyond fixing. The mathematics had finally caught up with her, and the sum was prison. The prison cart lurched over rutted roads while rain hammered the wooden roof like accusations. Clara sat with her bound wrists in her lap, watching Wickham through the bars. He'd insisted on accompanying the constables back to Durham, claiming concern for propriety. Really, he just wanted to watch her suffer. Comfortable, cousin? He leaned back against the opposite bench, boots crossed at the ankle. The accommodations will be significantly worse once we reach the magistrate. Clara said nothing. She'd learned in the past hour that silence infuriated him more than any response. No clever retorts, no protestations of innocence. Wickham's smile was all teeth. That's wise. Save your breath for the trial. Not that it will help. I have 3 witnesses prepared to swear they saw you stealing your mother's jewelry. The magistrate is an old friend. You'll be convicted within a week. And then? Transportation, most likely. 7 years in Australia if you're lucky. 14 if you're not. He examined his fingernails. Either way, you'll be gone. The estate will be mine without complication, and I'll finally be rid of my troublesome cousin who never learned her place. Clara looked at him properly for the first time since they'd left Thornfield. This was always your plan. The proposal, the assault charges, you wanted me desperate enough to accept you or destroyed enough to disappear. I wanted you manageable. You've proven yourself anything but. He leaned forward. You should have married me when I offered. I'd have been kind, relatively speaking. Now you'll rot in some colonial prison, and I'll sleep just fine. The cart hit a deep rut. Clara's bound hand slammed against the bench hard enough to leave bruises. The constables up front didn't notice or didn't care. Adrian will stop you, she said quietly. Wickham laughed. Your Duke? He can't even save himself now. Did you think attacking a constable in his own home would go unnoticed? He's likely under house arrest by now, facing charges of obstructing justice. Men lose their titles for less. The words hit like ice water. Clara hadn't considered. You're lying. Am I? The Duke of Thornfield physically prevented officers of the law from executing a valid warrant. That's not a minor infraction, cousin. That's a crime serious enough to warrant investigation by the lords themselves. Wickham's smile widened. You've destroyed him as thoroughly as you destroyed yourself. Congratulations. Clara's mind raced through implications. Adrian facing charges, his title at risk, all because he'd tried to protect her. The mathematics were suddenly, horrifically clear. Wickham had engineered this perfectly. Either Clara was convicted and transported, or Adrian was ruined trying to save her, or both. There was no good outcome, no escape, no... Wait. Clara's fingers found the seam in her borrowed dress where she'd hidden the last thing Aunt Margaret had given her. Not the pistol, the constables had confiscated that immediately, but something smaller, a piece of paper folded tight and pressed into her palm during their final embrace. If everything goes wrong, Margaret had whispered, remember you're not alone. Clara worked the paper free while Wickham stared out the window, bored now that she'd stopped responding. She unfolded it carefully, one-handed, keeping it low and out of sight. Inside was an address in London and 3 words in her aunt's tight script. Solicitor, owes me. Below that, in different ink, older and faded, evidence box, study, 3rd shelf. Clara's heart hammered. Evidence, 3rd shelf. Her father's study, which would soon be Wickham's unless Clara could prove his claims were fabricated, unless there was documentation, proof, something that contradicted his witnesses and exposed his scheme. It was a long shot, the longest shot imaginable, but it was something. She refolded the paper and tucked it back into her dress. Then she waited. Durham's prison was exactly as miserable as expected. Stone walls weeping moisture, the stench of unwashed bodies and despair, and cells so small Clara could touch both walls simultaneously when she stretched her arms. They locked her in one alone, which was either mercy or additional cruelty, depending on perspective. Magistrate will see you tomorrow, the guard said, slamming the door. Best get your story straight. Clara sat on the narrow bench and counted stones in the wall, 243 visible, probably more hidden by grime. The mathematics were soothing even when the situation wasn't. Hours passed. The small window high in the wall showed daylight fading to dusk, then to darkness. Clara tried to think, to plan, but exhaustion kept dragging her thoughts sideways. She hadn't slept properly in days, hadn't eaten more than scraps. Her body was giving up even if her mind wasn't quite ready to. She must have dozed because she woke to the sound of her cell door opening. Clara scrambled upright, expecting guards or Wickham or, "Get up, quickly." The voice was female, urgent and completely unexpected. Clara blinked into the darkness and made out a figure in a hooded cloak. Who? No time. Your Duke sent me. The woman moved into the cell, producing a key ring that suggested she either worked here or had bribed someone who did. Can you walk? I don't understand. Walk now. Understand later. Come on. Clara's legs wobbled but held. The woman grabbed her arm and hauled her into the corridor. It was empty, eerily so. No guards, no other prisoners, just flickering torchlight and distant dripping water. Where are the guards? Drunk. Your Duke's money bought 2 barrels of excellent whiskey. They won't wake until morning. The woman pulled her down one corridor, then another, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. He wanted to come himself, but half the magistrate's men are watching Thornfield. Easier to send someone expendable. You're helping a prisoner escape. That's a hanging offense if we're caught. Yes, so let's not get caught. They reached a door that opened onto a narrow alley. Rain had started again, turning the ground to mud. A carriage waited in the shadows, driver invisible under a broad hat. The woman shoved Clara toward it. Get in. Driver knows where to take you. Clara hesitated at the carriage door. Who are you? Someone who owed the Duke a favor. Now we're even. She turned to leave, then paused. Fair warning, running makes you look guilty. You sure you want to do this? Clara thought about the trial tomorrow. Wickham's paid witnesses, the magistrate who was his friend. The verdict that was already written before any evidence was heard. "Yes," she said, "I'm sure." The woman nodded once and disappeared back into the prison. Clara climbed into the carriage, and it lurched into motion immediately, wheels splashing through puddles, racing away from Durham like something pursued. Because they were pursued. Or would be, come morning, when the guards woke and found an empty cell. There'd be a manhunt, woman hunt, and this time the charges would be real. Escape from lawful custody. They could hang her for that. Clara leaned her head against the carriage wall and tried not to think about nooses. The driver took back roads, avoiding main routes and towns. They stopped once to change horses at what looked like an abandoned farm. No words were exchanged, just efficient movement in the pre-dawn darkness. Then they were moving again, heading south now, instead of north. Toward London. Toward the evidence Aunt Margaret had mentioned. Toward something that might save her or damn her completely. Dawn broke gray and miserable. The carriage finally stopped in what Clara recognized as the outskirts of London. Not the fashionable districts, but the working neighborhoods where people asked fewer questions and remembered even less. The driver rapped on the roof. "This is as far as I go. Duke's orders. You're on your own from here." Clara climbed down on shaking legs. "Where am I?" "Southwark. 3 streets south is a boarding house called the Swan. Woman there named Mrs. Davies. She's expecting someone." He tossed down her bag. When had someone retrieved that? And a small purse. "Money for a week. After that, you're on your own." "Wait, how do I contact Adrian? How do I—" But the carriage was already leaving, disappearing into morning traffic and leaving Clara standing alone in a strange neighborhood with nothing but a bag, some money, and an address she didn't fully trust. The Swan was exactly the kind of establishment that asked no questions because it didn't want answers. Mrs. Davies, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, took Clara's money and showed her to a room so small it made the prison cell look spacious. No visitors, no trouble. Meals twice daily in the common room. Break those rules and you're out. She looked Clara up and down. "Someone important must want you hidden. Try not to make me regret this." Clara spent the first day sleeping. The second day she ventured out carefully, hood up and head down, trying to get her bearings. Southwark wasn't Mayfair. It was rougher, dirtier, more honest about what it was. But it was also anonymous in ways wealthy neighborhoods could never be. Here, Clara was just another woman down on her luck. No one looked twice. By the third day, she was ready to make her move. Her father's townhouse was in Belgravia, currently occupied by Wickham, while the estate transfer proceedings dragged through probate. Clara watched it from across the street for 2 hours, counting people who came and went. Wickham himself appeared briefly around noon, looking pleased with himself before departing in a hired carriage. Clara counted to 100 after he left, then crossed the street. The servant's entrance was unlocked. Overconfidence or incompetence either worked in her favor. Clara slipped inside and found herself in the kitchen. The cook was elsewhere, probably at market. She moved quickly through familiar spaces made strange by Wickham's presence. New furniture, different artwork, the smell of his tobacco instead of her father's pipe. The study was on the second floor. Clara climbed the servant's stairs, heart hammering, ears straining for any sound of discovery. The study door was closed, but not locked. Inside, everything had been rearranged, but the shelves remained. "Third shelf," Margaret had written. Clara scanned the books. Law texts, accounting ledgers, nothing that looked like... There. A wooden box, plain and dust-covered, shoved between 2 oversized volumes. Clara pulled it down carefully. No lock. Inside, letters, documents, and... Her breath caught. A ledger in Wickham's own handwriting, detailing payments made to 3 men. The same 3 men he'd named as witnesses to her theft. Dates, amounts, specific instructions for what they were to say and when. Below that, letters between Wickham and the magistrate in Durham, discussing Clara's expected conviction before charges had even been filed. Discussing her transportation and what it would mean for the estate transfer. It was all here. Every piece of his scheme, documented with the arrogance of someone who never expected to be caught. Clara's hands shook as she closed the box. This was it. This was... "I wondered when you'd show up." She spun. Wickham stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking more amused than angry. Breaking and entering now? My, your crimes do accumulate. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I should call the constables. We'll call them, actually. But first, let's talk. Clara clutched the box. This proves everything. The bribes, the false witnesses, your collusion with the magistrate. Does it? Or does it prove you broke into my home and stole documents? He moved closer. Who do you think they'll believe? A fugitive accused of theft and escape, or a peer of the realm? They'll believe the evidence. Evidence can be disputed, explained away. I paid those men for legitimate services. The magistrate and I discussed your case because we're friends concerned about justice. Everything in that box has innocent explanations. Clara backed toward the window. You're lying. Of course I'm lying, but I'm lying well, with documentation and witnesses and the full weight of respectability behind me. Wickham smiled. You could take that box to the magistrate himself, and he'd burn it while apologizing for the inconvenience. That's how this works, cousin. The powerful protect each other. Not always. Often enough. He was close now, too close. Here's what happens next. You give me that box. I call the constables anyway, but I tell them you were here trying to negotiate your surrender. You're arrested, tried, and convicted on the original charges plus escape, transportation for 14 years, possibly life. And if I don't give you the box? I take it. Either way, you lose. Clara's fingers tightened on the wooden box. He was right. She couldn't fight him physically, couldn't outrun him, couldn't... The window behind her overlooked the street, 2 stories up, but there was a ledge and a drain pipe, and she didn't think. She just moved. Clara shoved the window open and climbed onto the ledge before Wickham could react. Cold air hit her face. The street below looked very far away. Don't be stupid, Wickham said from behind her. You'll kill yourself. Better dead than transported. Clara, wait. But she was already moving, fingers finding the drain pipe, feet seeking purchase on bricks that crumbled under her weight. She half climbed, half fell, the box tucked under one arm and panic screaming in her skull. She hit the ground hard, ankle twisting, pain shooting up her leg. But she had the box, and she was moving, limping down the street as fast as her injured ankle would allow. Behind her, Wickham shouts. Ahead, the labyrinth of London streets where someone could disappear if they were desperate enough. Clara was very, very desperate. She lost him in the warren of alleys behind Covent Garden, then spent an hour doubling back and covering her tracks before finally collapsing in a doorway to catch her breath. Her ankle was swelling badly. The box was intact but scratched, and she now had evidence that could save her if she could just figure out how to use it. The address Aunt Margaret had given her. The solicitor who owed her a favor. It was Clara's only remaining option. The office was in Cheapside, modest but respectable. The nameplate read, Thaddeus Brennan, solicitor at law. Clara knocked before she could lose her nerve. A clerk answered, took one look at her, muddy, limping, clutching a wooden box like a life raft, and tried to close the door. Clara shoved her foot in the gap. I need to see Mr. Brennan. Tell him Margaret Whitmore sent me. Mr. Brennan doesn't see clients without appointments. Tell him. Clara pushed harder. Tell him Margaret Whitmore sent her niece, and she has evidence of judicial corruption. The clerk's eyes widened. He disappeared inside. Clara waited, every second feeling like an hour, expecting constables to appear at any moment. Finally, the clerk returned. Mr. Brennan will see you, but I warn you, he doesn't suffer fools or waste his time with... Understood. Where? The office was cramped and paper-strewn, smelling of ink and old leather. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles and the expression of someone perpetually disappointed by humanity. Miss Whitmore, I presume. He didn't stand or offer his hand. Your aunt wrote me a week ago saying you might appear. She didn't mention you'd be a fugitive. It's complicated. It usually is. He gestured to a chair. Sit before you fall. You look terrible. Clara sank into the chair gratefully. Margaret said you owe her a favor. I owe her my career. 20 years ago, she testified on behalf of a client when no one else would. Cost her socially, but saved an innocent man. Brennan leaned back. So, yes, I owe her, which means I owe you. Explain. Clara told him everything: the dinner with Adrian, the mob, her flight north, the arrest, the escape, breaking into her father's townhouse. She opened the box and spread its contents across his desk: the ledger, the letters, all of Wickham's carefully documented corruption. Brennan examined each piece in silence, occasionally making notes. When Clara finished talking, he was quiet for a long moment. "This is damning," he said finally. "Not conclusive, but damning. Wickham's defense about innocent explanations has some merit, but the pattern is clear. The dates alone are suspicious." "Can you use it?" "I can try. But Miss Whitmore, you understand what you're asking. Prosecuting a peer requires approval from the Attorney General. The magistrate in Durham is implicated, so we'd need a different court. And you're currently a fugitive, which destroys your credibility before we even begin." "So I'm finished." "I didn't say that." Brennan straightened the papers into a neat stack. "I said it's difficult. Difficult and impossible are different things. Here's what we do. First, you surrender yourself." "What?" "You turn yourself in tomorrow morning at the magistrate's office here in London. You make a statement detailing everything, including the evidence you've found. You do it publicly, with witnesses. They'll arrest me immediately. Yes, but you'll be arrested here, not Durham. That matters. The London magistrate isn't Wickham's friend, and the charges originated in Durham, which creates jurisdictional complications we can exploit." Brennan's eyes gleamed. "While you're in custody, I'll file motions challenging the original warrant, the arrest procedure, the witness testimony. I'll make enough legal noise that someone important will have to look at the evidence. And if no one looks, then you're convicted and transported, and I've wasted my time." He shrugged. "But I don't think that will happen. This box contains evidence of bribery, witness tampering, and judicial corruption. The Crown takes that seriously, even when it involves peers. Someone will look. The question is whether they'll act." Clara stared at the papers spread across his desk. Her entire future balanced on whether some faceless official decided her evidence was worth investigating. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Really?" Brennan was quiet for a moment. "Your aunt testified for my client when every respectable person told her not to. The client was a woman accused of theft by her employer, a powerful man who'd actually been stealing from her wages and blamed her when it was discovered. Margaret stood in court and called him a liar to his face. The judge was scandalized. Society was scandalized. Margaret didn't care." He met Clara's eyes. "The woman was acquitted. She's still alive because your aunt chose truth over comfort. I've never forgotten that." Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "All right, tomorrow morning, I'll surrender." "Good. Tonight, you'll stay here. I have a room upstairs. Nothing fancy, but secure. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." He wasn't wrong. Clara spent the night on a narrow bed in Brennan's spare room, staring at ceiling stains and trying not to think about prison cells and courtrooms and 14 years in Australia. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of nightmares. Morning arrived gray and cold. Brennan gave her tea and toast, then they walked together to the magistrate's office. Clara's ankle throbbed with every step, but she forced herself to keep moving. The magistrate's office was busy with morning business. Clerks filing papers, constables bringing in petty criminals, lawyers arguing procedures. Brennan approached the main desk with Clara beside him. "My client wishes to surrender herself on charges originating from Durham. Clara Whitmore, wanted for theft, assault, and escape from lawful custody." The clerk looked up, bored until he registered the names. Then his eyes widened. "The Whitmore case, the Duke's woman?" "My client," Brennan said firmly. "She's here voluntarily to make a statement." Within minutes, they were in a private room with the senior magistrate, a man named Thornberry with a reputation for fairness and a face like weathered stone. He listened to Clara's statement without interruption, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he turned to the evidence box. "You obtained these through illegal entry." "Yes, sir." "Which taints them as evidence." "The content is still factual, regardless of how it was obtained." "Legally, that's debatable." He closed the box. "Miss Whitmore, I'm placing you under arrest pending investigation of the charges from Durham. Mr. Brennan, You'll have access to your client according to standard procedures. I'm also referring this matter to the Attorney General's office given the allegations of judicial corruption. Thank you, Your Honor, Brennan said. Thornberry's expression softened fractionally. Off the record, Miss Whitmore. You've made powerful enemies. If even half of what you've alleged is true, Lord Wickham will do everything in his power to destroy you. Be careful. Clara nodded. I will. But as constables led her to a holding cell, she wondered if careful was even possible anymore. She'd already been arrested twice, escaped once, broken into a house, stolen documents, and accused a peer of the realm of corruption. Careful had stopped being an option somewhere around the time she'd counted chandeliers instead of dancing with eligible men. The holding cell was better than Durham's prison, cleaner, less desperate, but still a cage. Clara sat on the bench and tried to calculate her odds. Brennan was good, the evidence was solid, and the London magistrate seemed fair. But Wickham had money, connections, and the entire weight of his social position. The mathematics still didn't favor her. Days passed in a blur of legal procedures and brief consultations with Brennan. The Attorney General's office had indeed taken interest, which meant investigators examining the evidence, interviewing witnesses, slowly assembling a case. But slowly was the operative word. Justice, apparently, moved at its own glacial pace while Clara waited in a cell. Then, on the 5th day, something changed. Brennan arrived with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Not quite triumph, not quite relief, but something in that direction. The investigators found something, he said without preamble. When they interviewed Wickham's 3 witnesses, one of them broke, admitted he'd been paid to lie. Once he confessed, the other 2 fell apart within hours. Clara's heart hammered. And the warrant from Durham has been declared invalid. The charges of theft and assault are being dropped. You're still being held on the escape charge, but that's likely to be dismissed given the fraudulent warrant. I'm free? Not yet. But soon. Days, not weeks. Brennan allowed himself a small smile. Clara, you did it. You proved your case. Clara wanted to feel victorious. Instead, she just felt exhausted. What about Wickham? Under investigation. The bribery evidence is solid now that we have witness testimony confirming it. He'll face charges of witness tampering at minimum, possibly fraud. His reputation is destroyed regardless of whether he's convicted. And the Duke? Brennan's expression shifted. Adrian Blackthorne has been cleared of obstruction charges. Apparently he has friends in high places who vouched for his character. He's been searching for you, incidentally, quite frantically. Clara closed her eyes, Adrian looking for her while she'd been locked in various cells. Adrian who'd risked everything to help her escape. Adrian who'd proposed marriage in a storm and probably thought she was dead or gone forever. Can you get him a message? She asked. I can try. What do you want me to tell him? Clara thought about all the things she could say. Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you. Instead, she said, tell him my answer is yes. Brennan's eyebrows rose. Your answer? He'll understand. The solicitor left, shaking his head. Clara sat alone in her cell and allowed herself, finally, to hope. The release came 3 days later. Magistrate Thornberry himself signed the order, adding a note that charges would not be refiled and apologizing for the miscarriage of justice. Clara walked out of the holding cell into weak London sunshine and found Brennan waiting. Free woman, he said. Congratulations. Thank you for everything. Thank your aunt and your own courage. He handed her a card. My office address. If you need anything else, legal or otherwise, send word. Clara took the card with shaking hands. I will. She stopped, throat tight. I don't know how to repay you. Live well. That's repayment enough. Brennan tipped his hat. Good luck, Miss Whitmore. He left her standing on the courthouse steps, free but directionless. Clara had no money beyond what remained of Adrian's purse. No home, no clear path forward. But she had her freedom and her vindication, and that felt like enough for the moment. She started walking with no destination in mind, just moving because standing still felt like admitting defeat. London flowed around her, carriages and pedestrians and vendors calling their wares. The city that had judged her so harshly now barely noticed her passage. Clara had made it 2 blocks when a familiar carriage pulled alongside her. The door opened. Adrian leaned out, looking haggard and desperate and wonderful. "Get in," he said. Clara got in. They sat in silence for a long moment, the carriage rolling through traffic while they just looked at each other. Adrian's hair was disheveled, his coat wrinkled, and he had at least 3 days of stubble darkening his jaw. "You look terrible," Clara said. "I've been searching for you for a week, bribed half of London trying to find where you were being held." His voice was rough. "When I heard you'd surrendered yourself, I thought—" He stopped. "I thought you were giving up. I was fighting, just differently than expected." "Brennan sent your message." Adrian's hand found hers. "Was that real? Your answer?" Clara squeezed his fingers. "Ask me again, properly this time, without storms or prison cells or fugitive status complicating things." Adrian slid from his seat to kneel in the moving carriage, awkward and slightly ridiculous and perfect. "Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Not because it fixes scandal or protects anyone, just because I love you and can't imagine my life without you arguing with me." "Yes." The word came easily now. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, and it tasted like relief and promise, and the beginning of something neither of them could predict, but both were willing to risk everything for. When they broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. "Society will still judge us." "Let them. Wickham will appeal. He won't go quietly. We'll fight him, together. This won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is." Adrian pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Clara, I'm not promising you safety or simplicity. I'm promising you partnership, equal footing, a life where you don't have to make yourself smaller. That's all I ever wanted. Then let's start building it." The carriage rolled on through London streets, while Clara counted nothing at all except the heartbeats between them and thought that maybe, finally, the mathematics were adding up to something that made sense. She was free. She was vindicated. And she'd chosen someone who'd chased her through a storm and never asked her to be anything except exactly who she was. The battle wasn't over. Wickham still faced trial. Society would gossip. There'd be more struggles ahead. But for the first time in weeks, Clara felt like winning was possible. And that was enough. But winning, Clara discovered over the next 3 weeks, was more complicated than freedom and a marriage proposal. The announcement appeared in the Times 2 days after her release. The Duke of Thornfield and Miss Clara Whitmore are pleased to announce their engagement. Simple words that detonated like artillery across London society. The responses arrived within hours. Some supportive. Aunt Margaret sent a tearful letter and her blessing. Some vicious. Lady Catherine wrote to several newspapers claiming Clara had manipulated everyone, including the Attorney General's office. Most were simply silent, which felt worse than either extreme. "Ignore them," Adrian said, reading over her shoulder at breakfast. They were staying at his Mayfair townhouse, Clara in the guest wing, because even Adrian's rebellious streak had limits. "Half these people are hypocrites anyway." "And the other half?" "Cowards who will change their minds the moment it's safe to do so." He folded the newspaper. "We have bigger problems." He wasn't wrong. Wickham's trial was set for the following month, and he'd hired the most expensive legal team money could buy. They were arguing that the evidence was tainted, the witness confessions coerced, and Clara herself was an unreliable narrator with motive to destroy her cousin. "Brennan says they're going to call me to testify," Clara said. "They'll try to make me look vindictive, unstable." "Then we make sure that doesn't work." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I've been thinking. We should marry before the trial. Make a statement that we're united regardless of outcome." Clara set down her tea carefully. "That's not why people should marry." "No, but it's also not a bad reason. Clara, the longer we wait, the more ammunition they have. Questions about legitimacy, about my judgment, about whether you manipulated me. If we're married, those questions become significantly harder to ask." He was right, but the reasoning felt wrong. Clara had spent her entire life watching marriages arranged for strategic purposes rather than genuine feeling. She didn't want that, not even with good intentions behind it. "Ask me again when the trial is over," she said. "When we know how this actually ends. If you still want to marry me, then I'll want to marry you." Then waiting a few more weeks won't hurt. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but a knock interrupted. His butler entered with a card on a silver tray. Lady Margaret Whitmore has called, Your Grace. She's asking to see Miss Clara. Clara stood so quickly her chair scraped. Send her up, immediately. Margaret appeared minutes later looking older than Clara remembered. Grief and stress had carved new lines around her eyes. But she moved with the same brisk efficiency, sweeping into the drawing room like she owned it. Aunt Margaret! Margaret pulled her into a fierce embrace. You stubborn, brilliant, idiotic girl. I thought I'd lost you. Clara held on tight, throat aching. I'm sorry for all of it, for not listening. Don't apologize for being exactly who I raised you to be. Margaret pulled back, hands gripping Clara's shoulders. I'm proud of you. Terrified, but proud. They sat together on the sofa while Adrian excused himself tactfully. Margaret listened as Clara explained everything. The escape, the evidence, Brennan's help, the upcoming trial. When Clara finished, her aunt was quiet for a long moment. James, your father, he died 2 days ago, Margaret said finally. The words landed like stones. Clara had known it was coming, had prepared herself, but preparation and reality were different countries. How? In his sleep. Peacefully, if that matters. Margaret's voice was gentle. He asked for you at the end, couldn't understand why you weren't there. I told him you were traveling. Clara closed her eyes against the burn of tears. Did he suffer? No more than he had been. The doctors said his heart simply stopped. Margaret squeezed her hand. He loved you, Clara, even when he didn't understand you, even when the drink made him forget who you were. He loved you. I know. They sat in silence, grief filling the space between them. Clara tried to feel more than this hollow ache, but couldn't access anything deeper. Her father had been dying for so long that the actual death felt almost anticlimactic. The funeral is tomorrow, Margaret continued. In Derbyshire, small service, just family and close friends. Wickham will be there. Clara's head snapped up. He's out on bail? Posted by his solicitors. He's confined to the estate, but otherwise free. Margaret's expression hardened. He's been telling everyone you drove your father to an early grave with your scandals. That James died of shame. That's not... I know, but people believe what they want to believe, especially when it confirms their prejudices. Her aunt stood, smoothing her skirts. Come to the funeral. Face him publicly. Show everyone you're not afraid. Clara wanted to refuse. The thought of seeing Wickham, of enduring whispers and judgment while burying her father, felt unbearable. But Margaret was right. Hiding would only confirm every terrible thing people believed. I'll come, she said, but Adrian comes with me. I assumed he would. Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. Clara, whatever happens at the trial, whatever they say about you, remember you've already won the only victory that matters. You're free. You chose yourself. Everything else is just noise. After she left, Clara sat alone in the drawing room and tried to believe that. But freedom felt precarious when built on the scaffold of an incomplete trial and a society that wanted nothing more than to watch her fall again. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 days by coach. Adrian insisted on accompanying her despite Clara's protests about propriety. Propriety, he pointed out, had stopped mattering the moment London mob had gathered outside her aunt's house. They arrived the evening before the funeral to find the estate exactly as Clara remembered, sprawling and slightly shabby, beautiful in the way of things that had once been grand but now just endured. Wickham's carriage sat in the drive, a silent threat. I can make him leave, Adrian said quietly. No, he has a legal right to be here until the estate transfers. Clara climbed down, her legs stiff from travel. I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of running. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson, who'd known Clara since childhood, greeted them at the door with red-rimmed eyes and a fierce hug. Miss Clara, I'm so glad you're here. Is he inside? In the library, been drinking all afternoon. Mrs. Thompson lowered her voice. He's saying terrible things, miss. About you, about his grace. Some of the staff want to quit rather than listen to it. Don't quit, please. This will be over soon. But would it? Even if Wickham was convicted, the damage was done. The whispers, the rumors, the stain on Clara's reputation, those didn't disappear with a verdict. They avoided Wickham that evening, taking dinner in Clara's old bedroom and speaking in quiet voices about nothing important. Adrian held her while she didn't cry, couldn't cry, for a father she'd lost years before he actually died. The funeral was small and miserable, conducted in cold rain that turned the churchyard to mud. Clara stood beside Margaret and Adrian while the vicar said words that felt hollow. Wickham stood across the grave, glaring at Clara like she was the one who'd killed their father, instead of time and illness and too much whiskey. When it ended, when the coffin was lowered and mourners dispersed, Wickham approached. Satisfied? His breath smelled of gin. You've destroyed everything, the family reputation, the estate's standing. I destroyed nothing. You did that yourself. Clara's voice was steady. With your schemes and your lies and your determination to control something that was never yours to control. The estate is mine. The title is mine. And when your duke tires of you, and he will, you'll have nothing. I'll have myself, which is more than you'll have after the trial. Wickham's face darkened. That trial is a farce. Brennan's grandstanding won't change the fundamental facts. You're a woman who broke into a man's home and stole his property. No jury will side with you over a peer. We'll see. Yes, we will. He leaned closer. And when you're convicted of theft and perjury and whatever else my solicitors can make stick, I'll be standing in that courtroom watching you get what you deserve. Adrian moved between them. That's enough. Is it? I haven't even started. Wickham's smile was vicious. Did you know she's been lying to you, Your Grace? About her father's death? About why she really ran to London? Wickham, don't, Clara started. She didn't run to save herself. She ran to steal the evidence before anyone else could find it. Broke into my house specifically to destroy documents that would prove her father had disinherited her for moral turpitude. It was a lie. A complete fabrication. But the way Adrian's expression shifted, just slightly, just for a moment, told Clara the poison had landed. That's not true, she said quietly. Adrian, you know that's not true. Of course I know. But his voice carried a thread of doubt. Wickham heard it too. His smile widened. Ask her about the letters, the ones her father wrote in his final weeks. Ask her why she was so desperate to get to that evidence box before anyone else. There were no letters, Clara said, louder now. My father was barely conscious his final weeks. He couldn't write. Are you sure? Because I have testimony from his nurse that says otherwise. The crowd around them had gone silent, everyone listening now. Clara felt the old familiar trap closing. Defend herself and sound desperate. Stay silent and look guilty. Adrian's hand found hers. I don't care if there were letters. I don't care what they said. Clara could have committed every crime Wickham's accused her of, and I'd still stand here beside her. The words cut through the fog. Clara looked at him and saw absolute certainty in his eyes. But she didn't commit them, Adrian continued, louder now, addressing the crowd as much as Wickham. She defended herself against a man who tried to control her through manipulation and legal abuse. She found evidence of his corruption and brought it to proper authorities. Everything she did was in service of justice, not revenge. Justice. Wickham spat the word. She's making a mockery of— No, you made a mockery of it. By bribing witnesses. By colluding with a magistrate. By using the law as a weapon against someone who couldn't defend herself. Adrian's voice carried the weight of authority now, not just a man but a duke who expected to be heard. The trial will prove that, and when it does, you'll be the one who's ruined. Wickham's face went purple. You'll regret this, both of you. When the truth comes out— The truth is already out, Margaret interrupted, stepping forward. I have James's actual final letters, written to me, not to you, and they say nothing about disinheriting Clara. They say he was proud of her, that he regretted not standing up for her more. The lie was obvious to Clara, but beautifully delivered. Margaret met Wickham's eyes with steel. If you want to call my integrity into question in front of these witnesses, go ahead. But remember that I've lived in this community for 40 years. You've been here 3 months. Who do you think they'll believe? The crowd murmured. Wickham looked around and saw his support crumbling. Neighbors who'd known the Whitmores for generations. Staff who'd watched Clara grow up. even the vicar who'd performed the funeral service. "This isn't over," he said finally, voice tight with rage. "The trial will vindicate Clara completely," Adrian finished, "and you'll spend the next several years regretting every choice that brought you here." Wickham left without another word, his carriage lurching down the drive in a spray of mud. The mourners dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves. Clara stood in the rain and tried to process what had just happened. Margaret touched her arm. "Come inside, you're soaked." They retreated to the house, Adrian and Margaret forming a protective barrier around Clara as they moved through rooms full of memories. Her childhood, her mother's decline, her father's slow dissolution, all of it compressed into wallpaper patterns and furniture arrangements. "Thank you," Clara said to her aunt when they were alone, "for the letters, for lying for me." "Who said I lied?" Margaret pulled a bundle of papers from her bag. "These are genuine. Your father wrote them in brief moments of clarity. They're disjointed and sometimes incoherent, but the sentiment is clear. He loved you. He was proud of you." Clara took the letters with shaking hands, her father's handwriting, unmistakable even in its deterioration. She couldn't read them yet, not here, not now, but holding them felt like absolution. "The trial starts in 3 days," Margaret continued. "Brennan says they'll call you to testify on the second day. Are you ready?" "No, but I'll do it anyway." "That's all anyone can ask." The trial of Lord James Wickham for witness tampering, bribery, and obstruction of justice opened on a grey Tuesday morning in London's Central Criminal Court. The Old Bailey, with its imposing facade and centuries of judgment, felt like walking into history. Clara sat in the gallery with Adrian and Margaret, watching as the prosecution and defense assembled themselves. Wickham sat at the defendant's table looking smug and composed, his expensive legal team radiating confidence. The charges were read, the jury was sworn, and then the prosecution began laying out their case with methodical precision. The 3 witnesses who'd recanted their testimony, the ledger documenting payments, the letters between Wickham and the Durham magistrate. Wickham's defense attacked every piece. The witnesses were unreliable. The ledger could be interpreted innocently. The letters were just friendly correspondence between concerned parties. It was professional demolition work, and Clara watched her vindication erode with each successful objection. On the second day, they called her to testify. Clara climbed to the witness box on legs that threatened to buckle. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back, faces she recognized from ballrooms and calling hours now sitting in judgment. The prosecution went first. Brennan walked her through the timeline carefully, her father's illness, Wickham's proposal, the assault charges, her arrest and escape. Clara answered each question as clearly as she could, trying to sound composed rather than desperate. Then came cross-examination. Wickham's lead counsel was a man named Hartwell, known for his ability to destroy witnesses with surgical precision. He approached Clara with a sympathetic smile that made her skin crawl. "Miss Whitmore, you've been through a terrible ordeal. No one disputes that." "Thank you. But I have to ask, isn't it true that you've had a contentious relationship with Lord Wickham for many years?" "We're not close, if that's what you mean." "Not close. In fact, you've actively disliked him since childhood, haven't you?" Clara saw the trap. "I've disagreed with him on various matters." "Disagreed, strong word. Would it be fair to say you resented his position as heir to your father's estate?" "I understood the entailment. It wasn't personal." "Wasn't it? Your father's estate would have provided security. Instead, it goes to a cousin you actively dislike. That must have been frustrating." "My father's decisions were his own." "But you wished things were different. You wished you could inherit instead of Lord Wickham." "I wished for financial independence. That's not the same thing." Hartwell smiled. "Let's talk about your relationship with the Duke of Thornfield. When did you first meet?" The subject change was deliberate whiplash. Clara steadied herself. "At a ball in November." "November. And when did you become intimate?" That's not. You spent the night at his townhouse, unchaperoned. That's public record." "I attended a dinner party." "That lasted until after midnight." "Then you fled to his estate in Northumberland without chaperone or escort. You were arrested at his manor. Miss Whitmore, you've been living in scandalous proximity to a wealthy duke for months. Isn't it possible, just possible, that you engineered this entire situation to force his hand into marriage? The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered for order. Clara gripped the witness box and forced herself to breathe. "No," she said clearly. "That's not what happened." "No? Then explain why you broke into Lord Wickham's home to steal documents. Explain why you fled London in the middle of the night. Explain why every choice you've made seems calculated to either destroy Lord Wickham or secure the Duke's protection." "I broke into the house because I needed evidence that Wickham had fabricated charges. I fled London because a mob was outside my home threatening violence. And I secured nothing. I earned my freedom by proving my innocence. Proving your innocence with tainted evidence obtained through illegal means. The evidence is real. The witnesses confirmed it." After intense pressure from authorities, "Miss Whitmore, isn't it true that you're a woman with no prospects, no fortune, and no future except what you can manipulate from powerful men?" Clara felt tears threaten and fought them back viciously. "No." "No? Then what are you?" The question hung in the air. Clara looked out at the crowded courtroom, all those faces watching, judging, waiting for her to break or defend herself or confirm every terrible thing they believed. Her eyes found Adrian. He sat forward in his seat, hands clenched, expression fierce. Margaret beside him looked ready to commit violence. And in the back, barely visible, Brennan watched with the careful attention of someone who'd staked his reputation on her. "I'm someone who refused to accept injustice quietly," Clara said. "I'm someone who fought back when powerful people tried to destroy me because I wouldn't do what they wanted. I'm someone who learned that the systems meant to protect us often protect the powerful instead. And I'm someone who decided her freedom was worth fighting for, even when everyone said it was impossible." Hartwell's smile thinned. "Very moving, but it doesn't change the facts. The facts are that your client bribed 3 men to lie under oath. The facts are that he colluded with a magistrate to ensure my conviction before I was even arrested. The facts are documented in his own handwriting." Clara's voice was steady now, anger burning away fear. "You can question my character all you want. You can make me sound desperate or manipulative or whatever story serves your case, but you can't change the evidence. And you can't make me admit to crimes I didn't commit just because it's easier than holding a peer accountable." The courtroom was silent. Hartwell stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. No further questions. Clara descended from the witness box on shaking legs. She'd either saved herself or destroyed any remaining credibility. There was no middle ground. The trial continued for 3 more days, character witnesses for both sides, expert testimony about the documents, lengthy arguments about legal procedures. Clara sat through all of it, watching the jury's faces for any hint of which way they were leaning. On Friday afternoon, closing arguments concluded. The judge gave instructions. The jury retired to deliberate. Then came the waiting. Clara, Adrian, Margaret, and Brennan retreated to a private room the court had provided. No one spoke much. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered had been said in that courtroom. An hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. "Long deliberation is good," Brennan said at one point. "Means they're actually considering the evidence. Or arguing about how harshly to convict him," Margaret countered. Adrian just held Clara's hand and said nothing. At 4:30, a clerk appeared. "Jury's reached a verdict." They filed back into the courtroom. Clara's heart hammered so hard she could barely hear the judge instructing everyone to rise. The jury filed in looking solemn and tired. "On the charge of witness tampering, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." Clara's breath caught. "On the charge of bribery?" "Guilty." "On the charge of obstruction of justice?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered for order. Wickham sat frozen, his face ashen. His legal team was already moving, filing immediate appeals, but the damage was done. Clara couldn't move, couldn't think. The word guilty kept echoing, and she couldn't quite process that it meant freedom. "Sentencing will occur next week," the judge announced. "The defendant is remanded to custody pending sentencing. Miss Whitmore, you are formally cleared of all charges stemming from this matter. The original warrant is voided. You're free to go." Free to go. The words finally penetrated. Clara turned to Adrian and found him already reaching for her. They held each other while the courtroom churned with noise and movement, Journalists rushing for exits, spectators arguing about the verdict, Wickham being led away in chains. "It's over," Adrian said against her hair. "Clara, it's over." "Is it?" "The legal part is. The rest, we'll figure it out." They left through a side exit to avoid the press mob waiting at the main doors. Brennan had arranged a carriage, and they climbed in quickly. As they pulled away from the Old Bailey, Clara looked back at the building where she'd just reclaimed her life. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we decide," Adrian said. "Together. What we want, where we go, how we live. No more fighting for survival, just building something real." Clara nodded slowly. "Then ask me again." "What?" "Ask me to marry you. Now, when it's actually our choice instead of tactical necessity." Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. He slid to the carriage floor, kneeling awkwardly in the moving vehicle. "Clara Whitmore, I love you. You're brilliant and stubborn, and you've made me question every comfortable assumption I ever held. Will you marry me?" "Yes, but I have conditions." "Of course you do." "I want to work. Actually work, not just manage a household. I want to help women like me, women trapped in legal situations they can't escape." "Done. We'll fund it ourselves if necessary." "I want to live at Thornfield, not London. I'm tired of society." "Perfect. I hate London anyway." "And I want our marriage to be a partnership, equal decision-making, shared responsibilities. Not you protecting me from the world, but both of us facing it together." Adrian caught her hands. "Clara, I want nothing more than exactly that. Now, will you please just say yes without conditions?" "I already said yes. Pay attention." He laughed and kissed her, and for the first time in months, Clara felt like she could actually breathe. The wedding happened a month later at Thornfield, small and private with only people who genuinely mattered. Margaret came and cried through the entire ceremony. Brennan attended, looking proud. A few of Adrian's friends from Parliament, some neighboring families, staff who'd known Clara during her brief first visit. No one from London society. Clara had made it clear. Anyone who judged her harshly or spread rumors about her wasn't welcome. Adrian's solicitor had handled the responses, which ranged from outraged to sheepish. Clara wore a simple dress, cream silk without excessive decoration, and carried wildflowers from the moor. Adrian wore his regimental uniform because Clara had asked him to, wanting to see him as the soldier he'd been before inheriting his title. They exchanged vows in the manor's library, surrounded by books and maps and the evidence of Adrian's collected escapes. When the vicar pronounced them married, Clara felt not triumph, but relief. She'd survived, she'd won, and now she got to build a life on her own terms. The settlement of her father's estate took another 6 months. Wickham was sentenced to 7 years for his crimes, his title and properties seized by the Crown. The Derbyshire estate went to a distant cousin who agreed to honor James Whitmore's original provisions, a life interest for Margaret, and a small annual sum for Clara that she immediately redirected to funding legal aid for women. Lady Catherine attempted one final assault through the newspapers, publishing a series of anonymous letters accusing Clara of various crimes and improprieties. Adrian's response was swift and legal. A defamation suit that Catherine settled quickly once she realized the Duke was serious about prosecution. She retreated to the continent and wasn't heard from again. Gradually, over months and then years, Clara's story changed shape in London's collective memory. The scandal faded, the details blurred. Eventually, she became simply the Duchess of Thornfield, that peculiar woman who lived in Northumberland and did odd charity work with women and justice. Some people still whispered, some doors remained closed. But Clara found she didn't care. She had Thornfield, with its wild moors and ancient stones. She had Adrian, who argued with her about philosophy and politics, and never asked her to be smaller than she was. She had purpose, helping other women navigate the same impossible legal systems that had nearly destroyed her. 5 years after the trial, Clara stood at Thornfield's library window watching storm clouds gather over the moor. The estate had transformed under her management, more efficient, more humane, better for the people who depended on it. The legal aid fund she'd established helped dozens of women annually, and she'd just finished drafting legislation with Adrian's help to reform witness protection laws. Still counting things? She turned to find Adrian in the doorway, holding their daughter. Elizabeth was 2 years old, red-haired like her mother, and stubborn like both parents. Clouds, Clara admitted, 43 visible between here and the village. Anxious about tomorrow? Tomorrow was the parliamentary vote on their legislation. Years of work, coalitions built, compromises made. It would probably fail. Most reform bills did on first attempt. But they'd try again, and again, until it passed, or they died trying. Not anxious, just preparing. Clara took Elizabeth, who immediately grabbed her mother's hair. Counting helps me think. I know. Adrian moved to stand beside her. Whatever happens tomorrow, we tried. That matters. Does it? If the bill fails, then we introduce it again next session. Clara, you taught me that survival isn't about winning every battle. It's about refusing to stop fighting. She leaned against him, their daughter between them, and watched the storm roll closer. Thunder rumbled. Rain began pattering against the windows. It was the kind of weather that had once sent her fleeing across the countryside in terror. Now it just felt like home. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The scandal, the trials, everything you gave up by marrying me? Every day. Clara stiffened. Adrian laughed. I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that you suffered. I regret that society is built in ways that require women to nearly destroy themselves to claim basic rights. He turned her to face him. But I've never regretted choosing you. Not for a single moment. Elizabeth squirmed between them, making dissatisfied noises. Clara set her down to toddle around the library, examining books and maps with the same intense curiosity Clara had shown at that age. She's going to be trouble, Adrian observed. Good. The world needs more trouble. They stood together in comfortable silence while their daughter explored and the storm raged outside. Clara thought about the girl she'd been. The one who counted chandeliers and wore ugly dresses and believed her only option was to make herself smaller and smaller until she disappeared. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that survival meant fighting, that justice required risk, and that the only mathematics that mattered were the ones you wrote yourself. The storm passed. The sun broke through clouds in brilliant shafts of light that turned the moor gold and green. Elizabeth laughed at something only she understood, and Clara realized that this exact moment, was what winning actually looked like. Not triumph, not vindication, not society's approval, just a woman standing in her own house, with her chosen family, living a life she'd built from the ruins of everything that had tried to destroy her. Years later, when Clara's legal aid fund had expanded across England and the reform legislation had finally passed, when Elizabeth was grown and leading her own battles, when Adrian was silver-haired and still arguing philosophy at the breakfast table, someone would ask Clara what she'd learned from those terrible months. She'd think about chandeliers and compasses and breaking into houses and testifying in courts. She'd think about storms and prison cells and the moment she'd decided freedom was worth any cost. And she'd say simply, I learned that no one gives you power. You take it. You fight for it. You refuse to let anyone convince you that survival means accepting less than you deserve. Then she'd smile, the smile of someone who'd counted every terrible thing that could go wrong and done it anyway, and add, and I learned that sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is refuse to disappear quietly. The mathematics had finally balanced, and the sum was freedom.